A very good morning and a very warm welcome to all of you. Welcome to day 2 of AIMA's 51st National Management Convention. I'll request you all to please kindly have your seats. May I request you all to please kindly have your seats. We are ready to start with day 2's proceedings. I'll request members of the audience to please kindly have your seats. We hope all of you enjoyed yesterday's proceedings. As you all might be aware, the theme of the convention this year is India's Ascent, Navigating Global Uncertainty. We are privileged to have a most distinguished lineup of speakers, dignitaries, and a very eminent audience with us today. But first of all, we would like to thank our sponsors who have supported the convention and made it possible. A big thank you to our valuable sponsors. Our sponsors for this program are Platinum sponsors, Tata Steel Limited and Triveni Turbines Limited, Diamond sponsors, Apollo Hospitals Group, Jindal Steel and Power Limited and Kirloskar Brothers Limited, Gold sponsors, Air India Limited, Transport Corporation of India Limited and Union Bank of India, Knowledge Partner, KPMG in India. Silver sponsors, Ambuja Neotia Group, Apollo Tyres Limited, Kevin K. Private Limited, GAIL India Limited, Hindustan University, Loyola Institute of Business Administration, Chennai, Neo Foods Private Limited, Sona Comstar and TVS Motor Company Limited. Bronze sponsors, Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited, Delhi School of Business, Dempo Group, Godrej Industries Limited, GL Bajaj Institute of Management and Research, PGDM Institute, IMS Ghaziabad, JK Paper Limited, Mahanagar Gas Limited, Management Development Institute Gurgaon, Medicaps University, NBCC India Limited, NHPC India, NTPC Limited, Oil India Limited, Power Grid Corporation of India Limited, Punjab National Bank and Tata Chemicals. Corporate contributors, Bamal Lorry Company Limited, ASAF Small Finance Bank, Engineers India Limited, Hindustan Petroleum Corporation Limited, Management and Entrepreneurship and Professional Skills Council, and Nabha Power Limited. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout the convention, we will be conducting live polls during the session. Please do scan the QR code on your table or from the standees at the back of the hall to join the poll. The program is also being streamed live on AIMA's social media channels, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and X, formerly Twitter. Question slips are also available on all the tables. Anyone keen to ask any questions, you are requested to put it on the same, and please share it with AIMA's hall management team. The first session of day 2 and plenary session 8 is a panel discussion on buoyant India, navigating global turbulence. Meanwhile, let's take a look at the poll question for this session. India's domestic economy is big enough to shield Indian companies from global challenges. If you agree, disagree, or can't say, we would love to hear from you. Please do share your opinion. We invite all of you to participate and be a part of this opinion sharing. As we are about to start, a gentle reminder to please do remember to either switch off your cell phones or put them on silent mode to avoid distraction to the speakers or the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming on stage Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal, past President AIMA and Chairman the Hero Enterprise, Mr. Pati Singhania, past President AIMA and Chairman and Managing Director JK Paper Limited, Mr. TV Mohandas Pai, past President AIMA and Chairman Manipal Global Education, Mr. R. Mukundan, Managing Director and CEO Tata Chemicals Limited, Mr. Sanjay Singh, Director Strategy and External Relations, Jindal Steel and Power, and Mr. Hemant Jhajhria, Head of Consulting KPMG in India. A very warm welcome and a good morning to all of you. May I request Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal to conduct the session.
Good morning and welcome to the second day of the National Management Convention. This morning's session, we'd like to discuss a little bit about what's happening in the world and where we as a nation stand right now and where we are likely to go in both the short-term and the medium-term future. I have a very powerful panel here with me who has been introduced both in your brochure and I guess up there on the screen, so I'm not going to do any introductions. I hope that's okay with you. We thought we'll use the time to have an actual conversation. We are all aware that decade on decade since independence, India has actually grown both its economy and the pace of growth of the economy. But grown this, and I was discussing this with Hemant a couple of minutes ago, we have grown this on a larger population. Of course, the growth in the population accelerated a lot more in the previous century than it is now. But we have done this in a manner, even when we were being accused of growing at the Hindu growth rate, even at that point in time, we continued to grow the growth itself. Of late, the world has gone through an interesting shift from 70 to 80 years of the big move to get the world closer. Globalization, which was the key word being used repeatedly in every international conversation, today seems to be missing from the mix. In fact, we are actually pulling apart. It is a fractured world, and we are actually seeing wars take place, literally in the heart of the Middle East, in the heart of Europe. Who would have thought this was possible even 10 or 15 years ago? And the world is carrying on. So that's the other interesting thing. Fortunately, these have not spread, which have allowed large population on the planet to continue to lead their lives as if things are normal. India's growth at this moment is quite striking. We are the fastest growing large economy on the planet today. And also, we are amongst the few that shows potential to sustain this kind of growth. The question that we have to ask ourselves is 6.7, 6.8, 7% growth good enough? By the way, it's very high growth, because please remember, we're already a $3.7 trillion economy, and we are saying we will be a $7.3 trillion economy in the not too distant future, literally at the end of this decade. So we will add another India to the economy in this short period of time. So it is lightning growth. But for our needs, for the number of people in India who still live in abject poverty, are we addressing their needs? Because the one good thing that has happened in India over the last 50 years or so is that every political party across the entire spectrum agrees that the only answer to address India's problem is growth. So growth is now a given. The question is, can we continue to grow, and can we grow all of India, not just parts of India? Because in rural India today, we still have a lot of poverty. Because if you think about the numbers, they actually demonstrate there is still more poverty in the rural areas than in the urban areas. The urban areas themselves are under strain because of massive migration taking place from the rural to the urban centers. And the urban infrastructure is not designed for the kind of population that we already have. So that's to do with inside India. Fortunately today, on the industry side and on the economy side, India is making big, bold moves. Building 200 new airstrips into airports, building 27 new seaports, the largest road building program anywhere in any country ever in the history of mankind. So I'm not sure whether we are explaining these well enough to the world and even to ourselves. There's some fantastic things going on. But we also face challenges. The quality of life in terms of air quality, water quality, the ability to commute, the ability to get to work, the quality of education, the spread of education, availability and access to quality healthcare. So we do have challenges which need to be addressed at the same time. But let me get to India and the world, because that's what I hope our panel will be talking about. Increasingly, India has become a player in geopolitics. India's economy and economic rise is being both accepted. We hope it will be not seen as a threat by other countries, as China's has been, because China was the last big growth that we have seen of a large economy coming out of this part of the world. And people often used to compare India and China. I don't think they are comparable, by the way. They're quite different. China, as did many other countries, built an external economy first, and then they built their domestic markets. In India, it's actually the reverse. We built a local economy first. We are now trying to become part of the global economy. Although our move is to do more and more in India, but we cannot do it without being part of the global value chain. Harsh, may I start with you? You play an amazing role in many institutions. You are not only a unique industry leader, you have a deep study of economy and of global economics, having got to the number close to the top at ICC, having run India, UK, IBC, and many others, and also FICCI. Would you tell us how is this now being seen, India's rapid growth? And I'm saying rapid because it is faster than the rest of the world. The question we have to ask is, can we grow at 10% plus? Should we even grow at 10% plus? Could that be overheating? And would that be seen as a threat by other parts of the world?
Well, thank you, Sunil, for those compliments, many of which are not really true, but as a friend, I'll accept it. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Pleasure to be here on this panel. I think what Mr. Munjal talked in terms of the way our economy is growing, the way it is shaped within the global economy, are indeed very important questions. I think Sunil, to answer your question, the first part, should India grow at this pace? I think we need to grow at this pace. And I think most of the people in this room agree. If we have to find jobs and have a better quality of life for our extremely large population, and you alluded to that when in your opening remarks. So the rate of growth, the desired rate of growth is something which has to be dictated also by our desires as a nation for our people. Now, can we do this? That's the real tough one. I think that is where the government has been engaged to try and push this. I certainly think that the kind of growth rate that we are exhibiting, give or take a little bit, should continue to happen. The issue is, will this growth create the kind of jobs that we need? And today, as the chairman said in his opening remarks, the geopolitical situation and the economics globally, do they make it helpful or are they a challenge? Today, I believe that we have to choose the opportunities we get. Our opportunity in India of a growing domestic market, our opportunity of a demographic dividend, our opportunity of having hugely skilled and talented people, not just numbers. Our opportunity to be, our advantage at being nimble, at being frugal. Those are the opportunities that we have by which we can compete better. The challenges are in terms of really the kind of, if I may say, the rise of protectionism that is happening in the world. Because they are facing, the so-called advanced countries or developed countries are facing a problem. They are facing a problem of aging demographics. They are facing a problem of stagnating or even declining growth. So how do they, and a huge social cost of keeping a population which is aging still there. So and not enough growth happening within the economy. Therefore, they have a different set of imperatives, and we in the developing world have a different set of imperatives. So the real issue here is, how do we balance and find our own path? And I believe that India will have to carve its own path. That's the simple and plain answer, Sunil.
Thank you. Mohan, your exposure is frankly unbelievable. Education, healthcare, technology, people management, and you are a big champion of innovation, entrepreneurship, and early stage businesses. India is now one of the largest and the fastest growing ecosystem for early stage businesses. Do you think this is going to be one of the key drivers of India's new innovative growth and help us to catapult us forward rather than going through every stage of development which other countries and economies have done?
Sunil, absolutely. But let me give you some data. We are $3.6 trillion in GDP 31st of March 2024. This year we'll grow nominal 11.5%. We could reach 4 trillion provided the rupee dollar rate remains the same. Could be 5 trillion with 92% certainty by 2027. We'll be with 10 trillion by 2032-33, 80% certainty, provided all of us work harder, 72 hours a week and all that nice stuff. And Sunil travels more and gets us business. Now, why am I saying this? I'm very optimistic because of many reasons, and then I'll come to geopolitics. One, we invested $1 trillion in capex every year. Government 250 billion, and household sector and industry the balance. Industry about $450-500 billion in capex. Our corporate sector is very healthy with low debt. The capital markets are giving you capital today for the first time in surplus based on local capital, and that's very interesting. There are only two countries with large entrepreneurial system at scale, the United States and India. Entrepreneurs in India are now able to access capital and use technology to grow, and that is truly amazing, and you're going to see much more growth in future. Capital productivity is at all-time high. I think in the NSE 50, I think the return on equity is 15%, and which is very good, much more than the cost of capital. And focus on capital productivity in this country is very high. Labor productivity is coming up because of automation and because of the improvement in supply chain and because the improvement in technology is coming up. So I think all the factors are playing to our strength. Now, if you look at can we grow at more than 7-8%? The challenge is ICOR, incremental capital output ratio for India is 4. That means it requires 4 units of capital for 1 unit of output, right? So we got to invest, we're investing 31% of GDP, we got to invest 35% of GDP. Can we invest 35% of GDP? The economy could heat up. Now that is the challenge of the economy heating up because the barriers to the growth of the economy still exist. And the biggest barriers are supply chain, ability to supply at the right price at the right time. For example, Sunil, you'll be surprised, in the CPI index, 46% is food because it's based on 21, 22 weights. And if tomato prices, onion prices goes up, RBI will raise interest rates, believing that raised interest rates can reduce tomato prices, which is ridiculous. So we have some structural challenges there in terms of higher interest rates. So I think we can heat up. But can we do more? Yes, provided we tackle the global markets. No country has grown fast like China did, the US did in the late 19th century and early 20th century, which are the export market. Are we exporting enough? We're not exporting enough. Today we export something like $770 billion, $450 billion is goods, $320 billion is, I think, services. Services certainly will grow 8-10%. Goods have to grow. And like Sunil said, the external environment is quite hostile because this global growth has come down. So that is a challenge. Can we export? That is the first challenge. Second challenge we face, Sunil, internally, are we going to put more money into infrastructure or not? Today, Sunil, 8 lakh crores is being spent on the bottom of the pyramid for all social action. And that's because politicians are responding to people who are demanding more, and people are the voters. Now, that is the challenge. In my state of Karnataka, 60,000 crores is being spent on freebies this year. And we are not a poor state. We are the richest state in India. Yet, 1.3 crore women are getting 2,000 rupees a month because they want to buy the votes. Now, will we be able to invest enough in the next 5-7 years? Now, that is the challenge. Because without public infrastructure, roads and the rail network, we are not going to be productive enough. That is it. Will corporate sector invest? Yes. I'll give you some data, Sunil. 2023 March, we paid total corporate tax of 10 lakh 4,000 crores. Capitalized at 25%, pre-tax profit is 40 lakh crores. 24, we paid 11 lakh 32,000 crores, that is 45 lakh crores. 85 lakh crores pre-tax profit in 2 years. And this year will be close to 50 lakh crores. If you remove taxation of 20 lakh crores, that's 65 lakh crores. Dividends 10 lakh crores, 55 lakh crores will be investing. So we're investing. There's enough money being generated to invest. Now we have to invest, we have to automate, we have to do it. The last point in the domestic economy is, the World Bank wrote a report called the World Development Report 2024. They made an interesting point. To escape the middle income trap, the only challenge is innovation. And that is where things are happening in this country. Tremendous amount of innovation, but we lack a little bit of capital. For innovation and technology, there are 3 things: human capital in abundance. Second, we need physical capital happening. Third, we need financial capital. We don't have enough. And that's where we lack. We're integrating in the world. We need more financial capital for technology. And we are in the midst of the digital revolution. In the next 5 years, with AI, with hypercloud, with quantum computing, hopefully 3D printing and everything else, we're going to see unbelievable change. And the speed of change is going to be even greater because of all these things coming. And geopolitically, next 10 years are going to be very hostile. Why is that? China is a big threat to the United States, largest economy in PPP at 33 trillion. The United States now wants to keep its dominance, and the United States has got a new enemy, China, so they're going to go after China. Politics in the United States is very fractured. Europe is sinking with the migrants crisis, with no hope for them, and there's a problem, right? And in between, there's no growth not much of growth in Europe because of an aging population and because of structural issues about the past. So the external environment is not as benign as for China. When China grew up, it's much more hostile because we already have a China. China did not have an India. So if you look at all that positive, many things in the wind in the sails, but there are a lot of black spots which entrepreneurs in this country and leaders like you have to confront and take forward. And the hope is we promote our young entrepreneurs, open up the market, become more productive, and then I think we're on a good wicket.
As I expected, you're a mine of information, Mohan. So let me comment on 2 things you said. One is about growth and the potential to overheat. Theoretically, we can grow at 14%, by the way. But to grow at 14%, you need to remove all of the hurdles that currently exist, and you need to lubricate the rest of the growth. Now, is that practically possible or not? Because many of these are social issues, many of these are structural issues, some of these are economic issues, some of these are policy issues, which hold us back, which is why we are struggling to get from the 7.6% to the 8%, and not from 7.6% to the 10% right now. So, the second comment you made is about change in technology. I sometimes wonder if we are focused enough on the rapidity of this change and the impact that it's going to have on our lives. And I don't mean to say it in a scary way, because any change in the world has always caused disruption. It has caused some panic, and it's turned out to be good in the balance. Including when the first, horse-drawn carriages had to be taken out. So there was big panic. Where will the people go who were drivers of these horse-drawn carriages? We had the exact same conversation 5 years ago. Where will all the drivers go if the vehicles are driving themselves? So while on policies, Sanjay, you have been a policy maker. You are now sitting as a key player in a large business. Tell me, do you think we as a nation are doing enough in terms of policy? And I'm not talking of policy which allows enterprise to flourish and work on its own. We have had this initiative on ease of doing business going back almost 20 years now. So, and we continue to come up with modification to our systems. Of course, the first start was in late 80s, early 90s. But since then, it's been an ongoing initiative. Are we doing enough, and are we doing it fast enough right now to allow the enterprise in India, both large, mid-size, and emerging, to be able to tap into the full potential that we have? It's on.
Thank you, Chairman, and namaskar, everybody. The scenario in which we are at present, that has been highlighted by other panel members, the world is becoming insular. And there are barriers all over. And against this kind of a backdrop, our economy is flourishing, and we have grown last year 8.2%. And all of us have read that Ministry of Finance is now predicted in next 20 years we are going to grow at the rate of 7%. And if 7 to 8% is a rate of growth for us, and the infrastructure is growing in this manner as it is going on right now, like in next 5 years, we are poised to spend around 140 lakh crore infrastructure. There's CAGR of 15%. This is the kind of a scenario. But where are the bottlenecks? To me, the bottlenecks are, and which are being addressed by the policy framework. Government, has brought about a sea change in the policy landscape, as all of us have seen. Quite a few times what happens that policy implementation does not happen in the manner in which it is supposed to happen, and the outcome then becomes slightly distorted. Couple of areas which I'll say in terms of, since I am representing steel industry right now, and I worked in this sector for some time in the government as well, there are certain challenges. The biggest challenge, which is not only about steel, it's about manufacturing as such. That's about skilling. And that is the biggest challenge. And we don't have, everywhere it's in newspaper that jobs are not there. I think the jobs are there, but the skilled personnel are not there. And such kind of skilling which is required now for us to become Viksit by 2047, and which we are saying by 30 trillion economy by 2047 and developed nation by then. That kind of skilling which will put us in a higher orbit, that requires implementation. We have seen in this year's budget that what kind of focus Government of India has laid on skilling, entrepreneurship, and so much of funding has been made available. But the thing is how to really get it done. So in this, I'll say that the onus of skilling, which is very, very important, and in manufacturing also of technology integration, falls on the industry itself. Because in skilling, several models have been tried. The only model which has been successful has been where the industry has steered it. Because this is an area which is prone to market failure, there is information asymmetry. So there again, industry has to play a role in skilling and skilling of the kind which is required for getting us over into higher orbit.
Thank you. So from there, let me segue into the interesting point you made about industry's role. Now, Mukundan, you are one of the youngest leaders in the Tata Group. And you've done some interesting things. I noted that you started in ESG reporting before it was asked for. Your focus on things like sustainability and clean energy has been noted, has been appreciated, certainly by parts of industry. What do you think is the role that we as industry can play to make the big shift on bringing real focus onto action which impacts everyday issues to do with sustainability, to do with people practices? And governance, again, since you are at ESG, governance is one more issue which has actually been a big bother over the last few decades. The large number of scams and scandals one has heard in companies, in cities, in countries, amongst leaders in all walks of life, has been a big disruptive force in smooth growth across the board. So are there things that we as industry can do to help smoothen this entire path?
So thank you, Chairman. I think what I will first do is to sort of triangulate what I've seen in the last 1 year or so. We've actually traveled 25 cities. This time I decided to Bharat Brahman just to understand what is really going on the ground and how do we connect up to what businesses can do. I think I'll come to that point. And I think much of it has been highlighted. What we see on the ground, you've seen that whole issue related to jobs and skills, which has been highlighted already. There is a pain in our MSME sector. I mean, while the economy is growing, I think we need to figure out how to engage with it. And lastly, coming to the point which I think Mohandas Pai highlighted in terms of trade, I think we can't just be isolationists. We need to engage with the world. And that's our internal issue with all the positives, all the positives of agrarian productivity increasing, which is leading to more people coming into cities. It can be viewed positive or negative. And also you look at education, women's education now is almost at the graduation level, getting at parity of men's education in terms of, so there are many, many pluses there, but there's also creating huge challenges for us. And then when you look at external environment, we know about the broken geopolitics, but really what it is leading to in daily people's life is there's a cost of living crisis. That's due to broken supply chain, and secondly due to geopolitics, which is pushing up basic energy cost. And there's a jobs crisis, there is a skills crisis coming out of all digital AI, everything. And small businesses worldwide, it's not just in India, are under pressure, serious pressure. And then top it off, I think we've got trade barriers and non-trade barriers, which are really again, pushing up this cost of living. Now, I think India's role in this is to see through this problem and at least play the role of responsible leadership. And I just want to say the word responsible is very critical. And therein lies also the opportunity for Indian business. Firstly, I think we need to think ahead and say the world forward will be more interconnected and we must make sure it gets interconnected. Secondly, you must engage. This point about I want to engage with this part, I want to engage with that part doesn't help anybody. And there's no dialogue. I think that piece has to be, I think the lead has to be taken, and maybe India has taken that lead. And lastly, we have to be forward-looking. I think we can't be saying that solutions which worked in the past will work in future. Some of them may work. Some of them will be opportunities we need to move forward. So really the opportunity for Indian businesses is to engage in the manner to say that it is not India only, but it is India and the world where we are going to be connecting with you, we are going to be making sure that we are going to engage with you, and we are going to be the solution providers for future. And many things are in our favor. And let me just say this. Firstly, you look at innovation, the stuff which is happening in space, stuff, opportunity which is there in nuclear. I think these are all huge opportunities to change the energy landscape, the opportunity landscape, bioresources, marine resources, and then stack that up with AI digital. I think you've got a perfect recipe for rebuilding and reimagining the future. And then the bottlenecks really are around, our issues of energy, and that needs to get addressed, logistics, skills and talent, which are softer aspects. And in many ways, the behavior change begins to happen only in two ways, in my view. We have all studied in management since we are in our All India Management School, and we all know about this Jhajhria window. I mean, if you go back and say, listen, what is the framework we need to use? And Jhajhria window says that if you want to improve yourself and you want to be forward-looking, there are only two things you need to do, which is self-disclosure, and secondly, engage in feedback. That's what leads to improvement, by the way. And ESG reporting, as you said, being ahead of the curve, is very much part of that self-disclosure. We are saying, listen, this is what we are, however good, bad, ugly it is, but we have a pathway forward, and that leads to feedback coming to us to say, what do we do next? So we've said many things. For example, some of the things are very difficult because we are in hard to abate sector, especially steel, power, chemicals. These are all, and airline, my colleague from airline is here, I think very difficult to abate sector. But we said by 2030, each company will have a specific target. Most companies have said 30% reduction in carbon. We said by 2045, we will be net zero across the company. But after having done this work, I think most companies are on that path. So the surprising thing is, once you put a number out on the ground, teams figure out, I don't know how these solutions are coming. We said we'll be more circular. We're going to work on biodiversity. Difficult challenges, but this is one piece of the puzzle which we're wanting to do. And all our companies, those which are listed, not listed, are going to sort of report on this and engage on this. And the piece around this, as you mentioned, is this, there is an element of governance standard which comes out of what I call as transparency. Are you being transparent? See, the first level is reporting, second level is disclosure, third level is, transparency. Transparency is a philosophy itself. And I think as long as Indian businesses are moving in the direction of let's be more transparent, I think we will probably get the solution. And engage with the world in a positive way. So I think Indian businesses are to be solution providers to the world. And the reason I say that there's nowhere in the world is there a lab of implementing great cost solutions at mass scale. You can't get this anywhere, this combination. This is an opportunity India has.
And also interestingly, we are the only country in the world which has so far met all of the commitments that we made to build a cleaner nation. Although we could do more because our targets were a little bit further away than many other countries. So there is a lot of good happening. The challenge we have is because of our scale, size, diversity, that we have pockets of and islands of excellence. We don't share enough, and we're not able to, at this moment, scale those islands into much larger areas of excellence. Hemant, let me come to you now. You are a banker, you are a consultant, you have wonderful, amazing exposure on what's happening in the world, including in countries like China, which have done rapid development over the last some decades, and you're also a student of economic history, from what I gathered in our short conversation. Now, having heard all the other speakers, does it appear to you that the formula that we have right now is the right one for our growth over the next 25 to 30 years? Or is there something we can learn from our own history or the world's history which would tell us that there is some mid-course correction required here?
Thanks, Sunil. So I think, I would see the growth that India is going through in the context of economic history, and I'm a keen student of economic history, like you said. There are many countries that have gone through like this kind of very high growth phases US in early 20th century, Japan has gone through in the later 20th century. I mean, in the 80s, if you remember, there was a time everyone thought Japan will become the #1 country. And then, what happened? China has gone through its own path. And each of them has, we will have to chart our own path. There is no doubt about it. But there are lessons to be learned, definitely, from the path other countries have taken. And it's very interesting. If anybody has worked with Japanese companies, when you work with them, it looks a very different setup. It comes across as very bureaucratic, but it works. And it works in its own unique ways. And that's a great example to say, there is a path that Japanese forged. There's a path that Chinese forged, which is, the state-driven capitalism, which used to be an oxymoron. If you said state-driven capitalism in 1985, probably, people will laugh at you. But today we see, it's exactly the same model. So there are lessons for us from what China did in Shenzhen. And Shenzhen is a story that, many have told, but go back to 1980 and just see China struggling to, build that city, which was nothing at that point of time. There are lessons to be learned from how US integrated its own markets. So US, and I think Mohan talked about it, but I think US is one of the, only countries that grew largely based on internal markets. So there were exports, but exports was, at the time of high growth, it was largely when it is integrated its internal market through highways, through all kind of different infrastructure. And I think we are going through that phase. I mean, look at what we have done with our highways, with our airports, with railways, with communication. Back in early 90s, when I was in school, making an STD call was quite something. And today it's like all of us are connected. So there is so I think, and what we have done, there are lessons to be learned from our own economic history as well. We have gone through different phases within India's growth. And by the way, we have always been growing. I think, Sunil mentioned every decade we have grown faster than the last decade. So look, that's it's a great commentary. And if you look at what we have done with the auto industry, what we have done with our IT industry, there are many, many pockets of, I can go on. And each of them had a start somewhere. I think now let me come to very quickly the phase that the world has gone through. There was a phase 1990 to 2010 of globalization, and countries that were, by the way, promoting and batting for WTO then are now probably got the one of the highest trade barriers in decades. So it's a complete somebody. The word that I last heard in one of the forums I had gone was globalization, because you see a slightly sluggish growth in I'm talking in the world markets, not for India, and you see the global connectivity around supply chains, cross-border investments, trade, a lot of barriers being put, and there is a protective tendency. Where will this lead to? There are many different hypotheses, but one of those is you'll probably see large regional hubs coming up. So Europe becoming a hub in itself, somewhere Americas, somewhere some things in Asia, and then there will be cross connection across, like for example, India, what it does with US and what we do with Europe and what we do with Africa. I mean, those are so there are two different ways it can move. What India has done over the last decade, coming to India, I think we have connected our country like never before, in terms of highways, ports, communication, GST, everything has made a unified market. We have brought the efficiency, so logistical efficiency, and I think we are on that path. It continues, but the kind of investments we have made, I think is going to pay us dividend. There are many, many reforms that have opened many sectors. That has been going on. I don't need to speak about it. I think much has been said about it. There is huge retail participation in capital markets, which we have not seen before. So one of the things which I'm sure many have noticed is earlier we were so dependent on FIIs coming into our capital markets and FIIs exiting. It was the biggest news. It's no longer the same. The retail participation is very high in terms of and I hope we manage it well and and we continue along that path, because capital being provided in the productive places is another great indicator of future growth coming.
Hemant, I'm going to come in here. We have 7 minutes to go. I want to do one quick round with some questions from the audience, and so that we can bring the audience into the conversation as well. So one of the questions being asked is about the rural population still living in poverty. Does mere GDP numbers of 7.58% actually help lift them out of poverty? Another one is about what is the scope of industry in Punjab? Are plants and investments moving out? Harsh, would you like to take one of them?
Sure. I think the question about GDP and poverty is a real challenge for us in India. Indeed, in many growing economies. But I think that is where the inequality of growth is the real issue that needs to be addressed. One thing that we are seeing is that at the top level, there is growth happening. And then at another level, we see certain amounts of growth. But there is a huge amount of population that is not there. So therefore, to keep it brief, I think our policies from a policy point of view, as well as I think businesses' own responsibility in terms of the community work we do and the kinds of things that we do.
I'm going to request much shorter answers because I have a bunch of questions with me. So, Amon, for you. Will this demographic dividend be a disaster if you're not able to educate, skill, and train people for the appropriate roles that they have to play?
Sunil, we have a employment report 2024 release which says 1.6 crore people are able to get formal jobs every year in this country. That's documented. 80% of jobs pay less than 20,000 rupees. That is a challenge. I was the government yesterday and they told him there's a challenge. And the challenge is very simple. The economy has to grow. And there is a labor shortage in the south of India. There's labor surplus in the north of India. And we are seeing a lot of people shift from the land, outside the land. What we need to do is to pick up the 300 poorest districts and bring in labor-intensive industries and incentivize them. Because Sunil, throughout our history, we have incentivized capital, not labor. China incentivized labor and built capital surplus. So I think there's a way forward, but I think we have to reorient a policy at this point of time.
Hemant, how do we reduce the dependence on things like medical devices and things of this nature coming only from China? What can we do? And may I request each of you less than a minute for the answer, please?
Yeah, so I think it's about the supply chains, and somewhere we need to start integrating ourselves in a lot of these supply chains. And it's probably easier said than done, but it's picking small pieces of supply chains and somewhere starting with the basic stuff and then moving to the more sophisticated stuff. I think that's the only way to make that happen, and I think we are starting the initial journey.
Mukundan, what about audit of large infra and other projects being implemented right now? Do you think that system needs to be better streamlined to get more and better outcomes?
So clearly,
because we do have delays and we have cost escalation almost in every project. We have had some improvement, but is this enough?
I think certainly we need to improve our processes and systems, and that again means that the basic originators of the projects must take ownership to its completion. So I think if that, what happens is people change and then it becomes, and then it's a moving target. And also this point about, we've been highlighting the government, this fascination with L1 at sometimes can also lead to D6, which is mean deadline being met on T6 or whatever you want to call it, timeline 6. So we need to move away from it and see the way businesses see it, which is total cost of ownership. Faster execution needs to be incentivized. We incentivize it. I think we need to bring that in our public infrastructure investments, and that's an engagement industry needs to do.
Sanjay, it says we have a long way to go to strengthen our public transport system, whether it's buses or it's local train or it's the other systems. What is it that we can do to make a rapid change right now? You know, metro has helped a lot in Delhi, but is this enough?
I think we are on the right path in terms of the kind of diverse systems which are we are putting in place. And one thing which is required is, according to me, and which we are already into, I mean, that is road network and rail network, the manner in which it's expanding. I think that's one part of it, but definitely another thing is qualitatively, in terms of public transport system, something more needs to be done, and all the levers, they are, I think, already in place. Only thing is that how speedily we are able to implement that.
So there's a question on economic growth, economic development, or sustainable economy. Which is needed for India? Frankly, I don't think this is a matter of choice. All of them are needed, and all of them are needed concurrently, because we have to grow. We have to grow in a healthy manner. We have to grow in a consistent manner. That is the only way we can address both our growth and our big challenge of poverty that still exists in the country. In fact, to my mind, that is the single biggest challenge that we face, is having all Indians, all human beings live at least a minimum standard of living and have access to opportunities. One of the biggest challenges is opportunities. We do not often think enough about this. We somehow tend to believe that those who live in cities are smarter, those who speak English are smarter. Frankly, nothing can be further from the truth. Because if you look at our agriculturists, they live and work in much tougher circumstances than we do. They still survive, and some of them do well. But the system needs to actually encourage the growth there. We need to figure out a way to remove obstacles. Agriculture today is as regulated as industry was 30 years ago. Because we are telling them what the input is and where to buy from. By the way, we are also telling them where to sell and what price to sell at. So we do need to free up parts of the country to develop, and we do need to develop a non-agri rural economy at the same time as well, to build real opportunities across the board. It's only when all of India develops does India truly develop. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and thank you to the panel for an interesting conversation. I'm sorry there are some more questions which I could not take, but we have run out of time. We are exactly at 10:15 now. Thank you.
Thank you, sirs, for joining us here today and sharing your thoughts and ideas. May I request Mr. Vishal Kampani, Non-Executive Vice Chairman, JM Financial Limited, to please join us on stage to present the mementos for this session. We thank Mr. Sunil Munjal. Our thanks to Mr. Pati Singhania. We thank Mr. TV Mohandas Pai. Our thanks to Mr. R. Mukundan. We thank Mr. Sanjay Singh. A big thanks to Mr. Hemant Jhajhria. Thank you, Mr. Kampani, for joining us on stage. So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the first session of day 2, the 51st National Management Convention. We are ready to start. The next session is plenary session 9, Afterburner, the next generation reforms. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a keynote session. Afterburner, the next generation reforms. Please bear with us while we are getting the stage ready. So ladies and gentlemen, as you can see on the screens, this is our next session of the day. It's a keynote session on Afterburner, the next generation reforms. Before we start the session, let's take a look at the poll question for this session. India can become a global manufacturing power only by adopting industry first, land and labor practices. Agree, disagree, or can't say? Please do share your opinion. We would love to hear from you. And once again, a gentle reminder that you have poll question slips on your tables. If you would like to address any question to the respective speakers, please do put them down on the poll question slips and hand them over to the hall management team. Ladies and gentlemen, please bear with us. Mr. Amitabh Kant, G20 Sherpa of India, Government of India, has just joined us, and he will be joining us inside the hall shortly. Please join me in welcoming on stage Ms. Suneeta Reddy, Senior Vice President, AIMA and Managing Director, Apollo Hospitals Enterprise Limited. We warmly welcome Mr. Amitabh Kant, G20 Sherpa of India, Government of India, and Mr. P. Balaji, Group Head, GRC and Corporate Affairs, Air India Limited. A very warm welcome to all of you. May I request Ms. Suneeta Reddy to introduce the session and our esteemed guest.
He looks after India's interests in the most powerful forum, 80% of GDP and 75% of its trade, and has shown India the way to punch up above its weight. One of India's most recognizable bureaucrats, your capacity for policy and projection has made brands out of government schemes. He is synonymous for God's own country, incredible India, for really lifting tourism. Then moving on, Startup in India, Make in India, and many more government campaigns that have resulted in great outcomes. While each ministry is responsible for a certain portfolio, Mr. Kant is like an overarching thread that connects all of them. He brings, therefore, a very broad perspective from tourism to manufacturing on the environment as well as skilling. Everything that is needed for the India of tomorrow. He goes beyond linear thinking, and more importantly, as a leader, he builds consensus. It is hard to find an individual with that breadth and depth, and we are extremely fortunate to have him with us today. Today, we are privileged to have you to discuss how India can fire the afterburners of next generation reform. Its economic growth must be even higher. So my gratitude to you and a very warm welcome for today's session. Balaji, it is a pleasure to have you, and thank you for agreeing to deliver the concluding remarks. You have been an outstanding corporate affairs professional, and your services at Nokia, Vodafone, and now Air India are well recognized and appreciated. A warm welcome to you. Ladies and gentlemen, the Indian economy has recovered strongly to achieve 8% growth, and the government has put a lot of impetus into this growth by investments and welfare spending. India's large companies are in very good shape now, as you would have witnessed from papers, profitability, and GDP growth. The environment is absolutely right for private investment in industrial capacity as well as in new technologies. Consumer spending too has remained strong in spite of inflation spikes. So therefore, the economic confidence in the country is very high. However, nothing is really ever linear. Growth rates spike and dip, and changes are bound to happen, especially in today's dynamic with markets shifting, regulation, technology, and of course, geopolitics. The economy needs constant nurturing to keep growing. Every now and then, new growth engines have to be added, and innovation has to be crucial. Meanwhile, we have to look at our old growth engines and see how they can be retuned, fine-tuned, so they continue to grow and become relevant for the tomorrow of India. Today, India has reached a juncture where it can get more out of its land, labor, capital, and intellect. India could tweak its policies, rules, taxes, technologies to improve the country's productivity, value, and competitiveness. This is a time when India can turn pressures into profits by changing its perspective and priorities. For example, unemployment, the fact that we have a huge labor force. How do we use skilling to turn this to India's advantage? India's energy and material needs are relentless and growing, yet India can shift to green energy products. It can shift, it can own supply chains and transportation and make it into an engine for growth. We are privileged to have Mr. Kant here, who has been involved in the future path for the economy as the CEO of Niti Aayog, and who thinks deeply about the possibilities and strategies that we are looking forward to. We are definitely looking forward to his address on putting India's economy's afterburners to work and make it move even faster. It is now my pleasure to invite Mr. Amitabh Kant to
homes. Ladies and gentlemen, last year, India grew at about 8.2%. We were the fastest growing large economy in the world. And today we are the 5th largest economy in the world, and the next 3 years we'll overtake Japan and Germany to be the 3rd largest economy in the world. In a world which is starved for growth, India is an outlier, and India has emerged as a very resilient powerhouse driving growth. India will be driving 20% of the world's economic growth in the next decade. What we are witnessing today is a once-in-a-generation shift in our economic position. Just a few years back, ladies and gentlemen, we were in the fragile 5, and from the fragile 5, we've moved to the top 5 in a decade. Many of you would recall that we were facing a twin balance sheet problems. The banks had a non-performing asset on their one side, and the corporates were in debt. How was it solved? The government has carried out various structural reforms. The goods and services tax, the bankruptcy code, the RERA, cleaning up bank balance sheets, corporate tax was reduced, ease of doing business, radical changes were made. The government has pushed for digitization in a very big way, and today we do about close to 50% of the total real-time fast payment in the world. We've opened up our space, geospatial, drone sectors in a very big way so that young startups can drive India's growth story. When the Startup India movement was started in 2016, there were just 350 startups. Today we have over 140,000 startups with over 140 unicorns. We've created a vast amount of infrastructure. Over the years, 40 million houses, close to about 35 million houses have been built. We've 35 to 40 million houses. We've built up, provided electricity to every house. We've done about 88,000 kilometers of road. We've provided about 120 million toilets, about 253 million piped water connection. We've also taken a vast number of measures on going green in the climate world. We've today have about 200 gigawatt of renewable energy. We've brought down renewable energy price from 24 rupees to 2 rupees. We've provided clean cooking fuel to over 110 million women whose lives have been improved. We've actually brought down the prices of LED bulbs and of electric buses. And for India, net zero is net positive. We have demonstrated to the world that by going green, India can do it at a green discount rather than at a green premium due to the size and scale of India. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenge is that we have to, by the time we become 147, we have to become a $30 trillion economy with a per capita income of 18,000. Today, ladies and gentlemen, you are close to about a $4 trillion economy, and your per capita income is close to about 2,500. Now, from 2,500, taking it to 18,000 per capita income, and taking your GDP from 4 trillion to 30 trillion means that you have to grow, your GDP has to grow 9 times, and your per capita income has to grow 8 times. And this would require, to my mind, this would require sustained growth of about 8 to 10% per annum for the next 30 years. Very few countries have managed to do this in the last 70 years. Japan did this during 1960 to 1990 in the post-World War II era, Later, between 1960 and 1990, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore did it. And between 1990 to 2010, China has done it. Now, when these countries were growing and expanding, global trade was growing. They grew on the back of exports. They penetrated global markets. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenge for India is that when the opportunity has arisen for India, there's a crisis in economic globalization. Global value chains are disrupted and protectionism has occupied center stage. The recent US imposition of duties, let's look at it, about 100% on EVs, 50% on semiconductors and solar panels on import from China. And there is an economic war on account of China subsidizing its industries and creating global oversupply. Look at their global penetration. In solar PV panel, they occupy about 75% of the global share. In electric vehicles and components, they occupy 60% of the global share. In batteries, they occupy 70% of the global share. And all this is that because the state is subsidizing their manufacturers, and they are penetrating global markets. There are several other challenges which India is seeing today. There's a seismic shift in geopolitics. There's a return of great power conflict in the heart of Europe. You have a war going on for 3 years. Middle East is up in flames. There is a severe humanitarian crisis. And there's a great concern, a huge impact on food, fuel, and fertilizer. Ladies and gentlemen, there is also the emergence of new technologies. Artificial intelligence, data, machine learning, quantum computing, space, biotechnology. Now, these technologies promise unprecedented productivity and wealth creation. But these technologies can also be misused to trigger conflict. And it's important that we have a pro-innovation policy which will drive growth and prosperity for the humanity. International regulations are necessary so that there is no misuse against humanity. So what we are seeing is a remarkable period of stability from the end of World War II through to the early 21st century has come to an end. We are in the midst of global challenges where India is planning to grow and expand. There are some other challenges which we need to realize domestically. The top 50% of our population actually creates growth. It actually secures well-paid jobs. It drives growth and prosperity. And the bottom 50% lives mainly in rural areas, relying on agriculture, wage labor, or as government welfare schemes to achieve basic living standards. It is important that we transform the lives of these people, the bottom 50%. If we were to have a 50% growing for prosperity and a 50% living on wages in the agricultural sector alone and through government subsidies, that means India will grow only at 6%. This is good if we want to achieve 6% growth. But if we want to achieve 9 to 10% growth over 3 decades, till 2047, we will need to transform the bottom 50% of India's income distribution from being passive beneficiaries of government welfare schemes to very active contributors to their personal and national growth. And this is what all of them want. They appreciate reliable delivery of food grains, but as the government has said, that it will drive growth and prosperity for all citizens. And that is why we had the Aspirational District Program, which based on outcomes really transformed the 115 districts of India. Based on that experience, my view is that we have to enhance productivity. And higher productivity requires high focus on Human Development Index. It means that we have to improve social indicators, our learning outcomes, our health outcomes, and our skills. Data shows that our learning outcomes leave a lot to be desired. You know, almost 35% of the students under 5 are not able to solve, even when they are in class 10, are not able to solve class 4 maths or even in their mother tongue, or do physics or chemistry. And today, it's important to improve these learning outcomes and improve our health outcomes. And every country that has grown on a sustained basis of over 8% over a long period of time has actually had very high quality education with improved learning and health outcomes for its citizens. And therefore, it's very important that we should utilize our biggest advantage. And our biggest advantage lies in the demographic dividend. India is one of the youngest nations with a median age of 29. And this accounts for nearly 20% of the world's total population of youth. That means out of the total young population in the world, 20% of that population comes from India. So what do we need to do? What are the key reforms? What are the key challenges that we need to undertake? First and foremost, ladies and gentlemen, I am a strong believer that if India is to grow at 9 to 10% over the next 3 decades and become a developed economy by 2047, we need to improve our learning outcomes, our health outcomes, and our nutritional standards in a very big way. And this would mean that many of the states like Bihar and Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh and Rajasthan and MP, they account for almost 50% of our population. And therefore, their share of agriculture, it is very critical that we transform them. It is important that they become the key driver of improvement on Human Development Index. Ladies and gentlemen, it is also important that we focus on a very, very credible story of transforming states so that they grow in a very big way. We need to create, India can grow at 9 to 10% for 3 decades only and only if we have 10 to 12 champion states. If the states do not grow, it will not be possible for India to grow. And therefore, we need 10 to 12 champion states which are growing at 10 to 11%. Not merely Gujarat or Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu, but we need the eastern part of India to grow at rapid rates because they are highly populated. UP and Bihar together account for 25% of India's population. And therefore, if these states grow, you are transforming the lives of a vast segment of our population. And therefore, it is very important that these are states where agriculture employment is very high. It's over 55 to 60%, and which will account for 90% of the increase in working age population in the next 25 years. And therefore, you need to move a vast segment of our population from agriculture into manufacturing and into urbanization. And that is why the government has driven this new 12 industrial corridors so that we can create new cities of the future and create new corridors of the future. And that will drive a higher share of industry in our GDP, which is very critical. The challenge is that our share of manufacturing is still hovering around 17.5 to 18%, whereas the countries which have driven growth, Japan, China, at the peak, the share of their manufacturing was 25 to 28% in their GDP. So we need to drive our population from agriculture into manufacturing, into urbanization. And this would require us to create 500 new cities of 1 million each, so that we need good quality urbanization, sustainable urbanization, so that we create cities where there can be walk to work, which is manufacturing-led, which is sustainable in nature. And therefore, to my mind, urbanization and manufacturing is one of the biggest challenges which India faces, which we'll have to drive. And to my mind, this would require us to bring in good governance in our municipalities. Many of our cities, what we are seeing today is a collapse of municipal governance, and we need to focus on the quality of municipal governance. And secondly, ladies and gentlemen, my view is that India will be able to drive this if we are able to leverage technology to leapfrog. We need to innovate, we need to do R&D, we need to do patents, and we need to commercialize our patents. While our patents have grown enormously, last year we had almost 1 lakh of patents, but the commercialization of these patents is still low. So the patents must lead to commercial products. They must get commercialized. And we must do quality patents which are leading to commercialization. Last year also, if you look at 2023, we've paid almost about 14.5 billion as our outgo for payment royalties, whereas our earnings our earnings is just about 2 billion. So our earnings is much less on royalties, whereas our outgo is much more. And what India needs to do to become is an innovative nation which is able to take its technology to the rest of the world. And therefore, the government has initiated several new missions. The missions for artificial intelligence, the mission for quantum computing, the mission for green hydrogen, and many of these PLI schemes, the production-linked incentive scheme, which will make India a manufacturing center. Like yesterday, the cabinet approved the new e-drive, PM e-drive scheme, so that we can drive electrical vehicle manufacturing in India in a very big way and become a champion of electric vehicle manufacturing. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm a great believer that innovation, R&D, patents, commercialization is critical, and the government has brought in a 1 lakh crore scheme so that it can work with the private sector to do greater R&D in cutting-edge areas of growth and drive India as a great innovative nation. The next point I want to make is that it's necessary for India to go green. Energy transition is the key to the future. Today, we import almost about 180 billion worth of fossil fuel. The ambition which the Prime Minister spelled out is that by 2047, instead of being an importer of fossil fuel, we should be an exporter of green energy. No other country is more blessed than India as far as climatic conditions are concerned. We today do 200 gigawatt of renewable energy. The aim is to use this renewable energy to crack water and produce green hydrogen and become the cheapest producer of green hydrogen, the biggest exporter of green hydrogen, and the cheapest manufacturer of electrolyzer in the world. And to my mind, take the price of green hydrogen, which is $4.5 per kilogram now, and bring it down to $1 per kilogram by 2047. And that will make India a champion of clean energy and exporting it, green hydrogen in its liquid form, ammonia, to the rest of the world. So ladies and gentlemen, I have spelled out the need for social transformation, the need to have a huge focus on human development, the need to create 10 to 12 champion of states, the need to have a very higher critical share of industry and in manufacturing in our GDP, the need for urbanization and municipal governance, and particularly sustainable urbanization, is the key. The need to leverage technology to leapfrog, and the need to go green. And all this will only be possible if the states of India do what the government of India has done in terms of ease of doing business. They need to scrap rules and regulations and procedures and acts which were built during our socialistic era and become champions of change. Why I'm saying this is that if India is to grow, they have to be the champions. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not merely India's decade, but India's century. India needs to unlock its vast potential, unleash private investment, and achieve sustained high growth in the coming decades. This will ensure prosperity for its citizens. And with prosperity, we must ensure a society which is vibrant, both culturally rich and harmonious. It's not merely GDP, but also the quality of life of citizens which will change. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Great pleasure.
Mr. Amitabh Kant, G20 Sherpa of India, Ms. Suneeta Reddy, Senior Vice President AIMA and Managing Director, Apollo Hospitals Enterprise Limited, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed my privilege to conclude this rather absorbing session. Mr. Kant, as always, thank you for an exciting keynote and for patiently explaining the potential of the next set of economic reforms. Your keynote was detailed and incisive, and we learned a lot about the government's thinking in bringing radical new reforms. Clearly, your passion and your vision for India is inspirational. It has always been a pleasure to listen to you. Thank you so much. Suneeta, I think your industry perspective was very lucid and positive. Thank you for the cordial welcome and for setting the context for the session. As a leader of India's foremost healthcare chain, you are part of an industry that's very reliant on technology, infrastructure, and skilled labor. And I'm quite certain that you, along with me and everybody else in this room, We're quite enthused with what Mr. Kant talked about, the intent of the government, not only at a central level, but to also kind of get the states to become part of the entire growth story for India. And indeed, these are very important points that you made. I think some takeaways, and I won't even attempt to summarize everything that Mr. Kant said in those 20 minutes. He spoke a lot about reforms and digitization, something that we also passionately believe in the industry are the critical foundations on which India is going to grow going forward. He also talked about the steps that were taken in the last decade or decade and a half that have gotten to where our nation is today, and also articulated the challenges ahead of us as we need to girdle ourselves and prepare for the journey from 4 trillion to 32 trillion, or per capita from $2,500 to $18,000 in less than 25 years. Obviously, we have some experiences to fall back on from other nations or from our own history, but truly the challenges are evident. It was spoken about in the first session as well, about the global slowdown, geopolitics, protectionism, supply chain disruption, and so on. And of course, the opportunities and threat that new technology kind of brings in front of all of us. And therefore, it is clear to me, as I've heard him and others before, that there is a need for collective effort to drive the growth of all of India. And that's really the critical path. All of India is the operative phrase out here. To drive productivity, whether it's for learning outcomes or for skill outcomes or for health outcomes, it requires all of us to participate, and it means that we need to be more inclusive as industry. It means that we need to be, as a nation, more responsive to the needs of people that are crying out for being part of this wonderful journey ahead of us for the next 25 years. I think Mr. Kant spoke about the government's resolve, and I must say from the industry point of view, we're equally committed to invest in the whole of the ecosystem. I know that's true about every one of our members here, whether it's in the healthcare sector or the aviation sector. We are saying that if there is nothing which is out here, if we need to go at the pace at which Indians want us to grow, the way aspirations are growing in India, then we need to build the whole of the ecosystem, whether it's on skills, whether it's in the case of training, whether it's about bringing a lot more people into the workforce and upskilling existing people. And that's a commitment that as industry, as management, we take very seriously, and as AIMA, we're hugely committed to that. Whether it's large corporates, whether it's entrepreneurs, all of us in the country need to contribute and innovate and build the future that is ahead of us and to seize the opportunities. And in that sense, I would say that AIMA brings all of those forces together for a collaborative conversation, whether it's the industry, whether it's entrepreneurs, large corporates, MSME, or for that matter, government policymakers. And I'm quite optimistic that with the next generation reforms coming in, industry will do what is required to be done, entrepreneurs will do what is required to be done to get us to the ambition of Vikasit Bharat in 2047. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience and for your attention.
I think we have 3 minutes for one question. We could actually listen to Mr. Kant for much, much longer, but I'm going to thread some of the points that he made and put this question in context. Mr. Kant, you mentioned that per capita income will grow from $2,500 to $18,000. You also mentioned that 50% of the population, which is low income, that we need to focus on them to make sure that we reach both 10% growth in per capita, 10% growth in GDP, and resultant per capita income. So the question here is that while Bihar and Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, all of them have employable population, labor that is skilled, they do not have access to credit. And how are we going to solve this access to credit for those who are in, the 50% that are not doing as well as those in the cities?
So, 2 points I want to make is that, first of all, it's very important to provide skills to the workforce. Now, if 46 to 50% of your population is dependent on agriculture, that means that the problem is not of jobs, but the problem is of good quality jobs. We are able to provide jobs, but they are very poorly paid jobs. So the aspiration is to move to better quality jobs. And this would mean skills. This would mean talents. This would mean a huge amount of focus on education and health on the population. And Let me also tell you that investments go where there is talent and opportunities come where there is talent. If you can create huge talent in these states, you will see these states growing up. And that means that this workforce will then move to manufacturing, better paid jobs. These states should focus on manufacturing. These states need to focus on urbanization. None of these states actually are very highly urbanized. So therefore, you need to focus on urbanization in a big way. And manufacturing-led urbanization will lead to better quality jobs. Similarly, these states need to focus on new technologies. Why are all investments going to either Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu or Karnataka? Why should not they go to these parts of our country? Because there's a lack of skilled workforce. And the skilled workforce is really critical to my mind for the future. So the governments need to put all their energy, all their resources on providing skills and talents to this workforce.
I think we've really run out of time, but thank you so much, Mr. Kant, Balaji, for that very informative half an hour. And I'm sure that we could listen to you for much, much longer. Not only do you have ideas, but I think the solutions are also there. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for chairing the session. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. May I request Ms. Suneeta Reddy to present mementos to our esteemed speaker and guest. We thank Mr. Amitabh Kant, G20 Sherpa of India, Government of India. Thank you, sir, for your presence here today. We thank Mr. P. Balaji, Group Head, GRC and Corporate Affairs, Air India Limited. With that, we conclude this session. Our next session is a fireside chat, Uncharted, India's role in a multipolar world. And the poll question for this session is, you could see the poll results for the previous question. Now moving on to the question for this session. A multipolar world will create more challenges for India and not less. Please do let us know whether you agree, disagree, or can't say. We'd love to hear from you. Please do share your opinion. And once again, a gentle request. We do have poll question slips on your tables. Please do note down your questions on those slips and hand it over to the hall management team. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. I'll request members of the audience who are moving about the hall to please kindly take your seats. Please remain seated. Please join me in welcoming on stage with a huge round of applause, Mr. Sachin Pilot, National General Secretary, INC, and member of Rajasthan Legislative Assembly, and former Cabinet Minister, Government of India. We warmly welcome Mr. Nikhil Sahni, President, AIMA, and Vice Chairman and Managing Director, Triveni Turbine Limited, and Mr. Sanjay Kapur, Chairman, Sona Comstar. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with a round of applause Mr. Sachin Pilot, National General Secretary, INC, and member of Rajasthan Legislative Assembly and former Cabinet Minister, Mr. Nikhil Sahni, President, AIMA, and Mr. Sanjay Kapur, Chairman, Sona Comstar. Very warm welcome to all of you. May I request President AIMA, Mr. Nikhil Sahni, to conduct the session.
Thank you very much. Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very good morning to Mr. Sachin Pilot and Mr. Sanjay Kapur. We have a conversation today, and I would hope to make this fun for everyone, as well as for Mr. Pilot. Sachin, if I may. Sachin doesn't need any introduction. As the compere just said, he is a very accomplished political leader, but he's also a student of management. He's graduated from the finest of institutions, both St. Stephen's and Wharton, which is also my alma mater, which I may say. But Sachin has had a great legacy in politics already at such a young age. He's a youth icon and has headed many ministries and has accomplished much. Each of us in corporate here have felt his impact through his Companies Act, as well as the implementation of CSR and women on boards, etc. But today, we have a conversation with Sachin around India and its role in a multipolar world. While a multipolar world is the reality of today, Sachin, it's based on a great power rivalry between the United States and China, which is centered around technology. It's never been more apparent than now, especially after hearing the Trump-Harris debates of yesterday, that there is an unequivocal rivalry between the United States and China as far as the US is concerned. And there is an unequivocal support for India at this current point in time. And geopolitics is a very, well, the way that I see it is very straight. They talk about interests. They talk about how they are working for their own interests, much like how India says currently that we would deal with Russia and we deal with our own interests. So I hope that we could delve into a little bit about how you feel what India's role could be in this multipolar world, especially given the constraints of interests and how we define those interests. What is the time frame within which those interests are really to be judged? And of course, those interests are dependent on politics. In a democracy like us, we base our decisions on the populace of who we represent. So what are those interests in politics? Now, to wear a different hat of your management, how do you see the management of politics, and how do we see the politics growing in this age of rivalry, which is based on technology, such as artificial intelligence? Do we see those aspects coming into the facets of politics? But lastly, what I'd like to come to you on is about the citizens that are represented in politics. What are their aspirations, and how do we feel those can be met in this world of uncertainty in geopolitics and geoeconomics, but where the trends of further digitization and artificial intelligence are very apparent? So to start off with, Sachin, could I get your views on where do you see India within this multipolar world? How do you see our interests? Where do you think our priorities should be? And where do you see the direction for us in the next several years?
Thank you very much, Nikhil, for inviting me here and for a very kind introduction. Thank you very much indeed. Good morning to all of you. Nikhil has thrown a whole bunch of questions, very pertinent and important questions. Let me just start off by saying that you spoke about geopolitics and India's space as we move forward. One thing I believe that we keep talking about soft power of India. There is no soft power if you don't have hard power. It's as simple as that. And hard power really is defined by your economic strength, by your military power, and by your voice in the world. Now, increasingly, India is finding a much larger platform on multilateral issues, on global issues, and we have to play that role. The challenge is upon us, how we shape that. And you're absolutely right. Our domestic politics, our own polity will define the direction, the way forward, the agendas, the challenges, the opportunities, and the successes. And in Indian politics, what I think we should do really is, we should do politics for maybe 30% of the time that you're in government. 70% of the time should be for governance. Governance about delivery, governance about shaping foreign policy, governance about meeting, like you said, the aspirations of most of our citizens. And if you're able to do that, we're a very robust democracy. We just had a general election. We all know the results of it. It has proven to the world that Indian democracy is thriving, it's resilient, and it is ready to take on a global challenge. Geopolitics, and it really should be shaped, ideally, by self-interest. Every nation's foreign policy self-serves first, and then on a larger issue. Now, in my view, Nikhil, where a country wants to be and where it should be is defined by its foreign policy. How to get to that aim and how to get to that objective is diplomacy. And foreign policy is not a huge political issue in this country, but as India grows in its size and scale and influence, we're increasingly being looked upon as a nation that has a voice that people want to hear, but we must also hold ourselves to certain standards. We have to be able to call out when we think things are wrong. It's such an uncertain world. Last few years, we've seen the COVID crisis. We've seen multiple now conflicts in Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, and many such issues that are hampering us. So here is a time where, like you said, the traditional rivalry last decade has been the US and China. But I think I would not be out of place to say that India is certainly going to play a much larger role, not only because we are neighbors of China, but because we uphold certain principles and certain issues that matter to the people of the world. Every fifth person in the world is an Indian person. So what we have to do as a country is to make ourselves stronger as we go on. We'll have differences, Nikhil, in politics. As you know, when you fight elections, we counter each other on issues, we debate, we deliberate, we oppose, sometimes very vehemently. But the slight concern that I have is that you can oppose, you can challenge, you can criticize, but you have got to be able to hold yourself to certain standards. I keep saying this wherever I go, that I would not like to hear, I wouldn't like to say things about other people that I wouldn't want to hear for myself. So sometimes in our domestic discourse, we really cross the line. And this is something the younger people are seeing and observing much more than ever before. And we have to be very mindful of what sort of a political discourse we're presenting to the nation, to the younger generation. If you're able to consolidate, we have many gains. We have all the right ingredients for us to, from here, become a launching pad to be one of the top ranking nations in the world. I have absolutely no doubt about it. And any nation whose young people have faith in its future, can reach anywhere. I know many countries where people are moving out, people are despondent, people are not so gung-ho about their own country's future, and that leads to demotivated, underperforming individuals, which leads to a societal dysfunctional. And India is certainly not there. I see a lot of young people say that today's young generation are not nationalistic enough, are not ambitious enough, are not driven enough. Not true. People in India want to perform, and we as policymakers, we as politicians really have a much larger role than just to fight and win elections.
I'd like to come to the youth a little bit later in our conversation, but just sticking to the geopolitics and India's position in it, you talked about shared values. That's been a theme that a lot of governments use in terms of aligning each other. What does that mean, shared values? We say that we're all democratic institutions. What does that mean? What does shared values mean, and how does that actually translate in thought and practice, in your opinion?
I think shared values are freedom of speech, liberty, democracy, freedom of press. All these are, any functional republic, any democratic nation state has to believe in all these. These are fundamentals. But I must say that there are nation states, and there are governments who profess solidarity towards these issues, but actually practice otherwise. It won't be fair for me to call out countries and governments, but I think as an Indian, as a country that has a rich tradition, that has actually demonstrated by action for thousands of years and several decades post-independence, that we are a country that has really held itself to a very transparent accountability systems in the world. So shared values of empathy, of compassion, etc., are human values. But for governments, for nations, for countries, it has to be about how you take stands, how you take sides, how you're able to differentiate between good and bad. It can't be that when my friend or my ally does something wrong, I ignore it, and when it suits me, I go and bomb some other nation. That can't be it. And I think the global reality is that the world order has to change. The current UN system, for example, has almost failed. It's not functioning the way it was supposed to post-Second World War. There's not a single African nation on the Security Council. India's not on the Security Council. These are all realities that we have to confront and take friends and allies to make sure that things turn the way that we want them to turn.
No, I agree with you. The United Nations is, and especially the Security Council, is not representative, especially of India and the Global South. But other institutions such as the WTO has been weaponized by countries like China. It's pretty ineffective now, to the extent that bilateral treaties are the rule of the game. But it has a geopolitical flavor to it. China has a very distinct style in terms of how it operates politically and economically, and how they bully their neighbors. What is your view on how India's current policy or future policy should be towards China, which very frankly has a time frame, in my opinion, which exceeds any domestic policy economic agenda?
But to be completely honest, I don't think we've handled China as well as we should have. Last few years, there's been a certain animosity against China for whatever it's done or not done. And we, as an immediate neighbor, have our own issues on the border, bilateral issues, etc., incursions on our land. I don't think we've done as much as we should have done, because we are the natural alternative to any right-thinking nation about who it wants to trade with, who it wants to align politically with. I don't think we've done enough in that direction. And let me tell you, no world body, whether it's UN, IMF, World Bank, is non-political. Everything is political. I said in the beginning, there is no soft power without hard power. And China has actually exercised that to the fullest extent. Look at the way they have tried to influence nations in the African Union, in the CIS countries, in the Caucasus, in Eastern Europe, and even rogue nation states such as North Korea and other ones. So China is doing all that it can to change the paradigm of the great game that's being played out. But have we done enough to counter that, to become the natural alternative choice for global bodies, for large nations? Not yet. I think we haven't done that enough. And we have to change the rules of the game, because if we don't do that now, a decade later it'll be too late.
But the reality is that our trade balance with China keeps growing. The Indian consumer loves Chinese product, and especially the price point at which they come. So is it fair for the Indian consumer to be denied in its short term what his aspirations may be for a Xiaomi phone or a equivalent car or whatever it may be?
Nikhil, I don't think the demand-supply curve can actually determine the way a society or a country thinks and looks ahead. I don't think price points can determine national interest. While I think consumers must get benefit of the best price points that can be made available, but it can't be. If you ask people, is national security more important? Is India's position in the global paradigm more important than getting a 5% cheaper mobile phone? I think you'll get your answer. So I think there's an industry pressure, there's a consumer pressure, But look at other countries, what they've done. Look at Europe. Look at US. They've taken strong measures against, the predatory pricing that China does, the dumping that China does. So we have to also align ourselves to what what the global view of China is. I'm not against any country. I think we are neighbors, and like someone said, you can choose your friends, you can't choose your neighbors. We have to live with the neighbors we have. But can we be more proactive in containing the influences? Can we be a real counterbalance? Can we live up to the expectations that the Western world and the US has of India in South Asia, in Asia? Are we doing enough to counter the Beijing, Russia sort of, coming together? Are we doing that enough? Are we challenging people on the right platform? In fact, just our own borders, I think, Nikhil, is important to state, we should come out clean about what's happening on our borders. There have been reports of incursions from Chinese troops for so long, and we've heard either denial or absolutely no answers. So we must be able to stand front. And I think when it comes to national interest, all political parties are together. If you recall, there was an attack on Parliament when Vajpayee was Prime Minister. That was an attack on India. Every single political party stood by the government of the day and said, you do what it takes to take people to task. And even today I say, whether we're in opposition or government, every citizen, every political party, every ideology is absolutely unanimously united when it comes to nation, India, security. So I think people who are in charge of affairs should take advantage of that. You'll have a domestic quibbles. Jhagda thoda bahut hoga, Nikhil, aapas mein hota hai hum logon ka. But when it comes to India, when it comes to supporting our national team, supporting our heroes at the Olympics, supporting our soldiers in uniform, there is absolutely no doubt in anyone's mind that we all stand as united as ever.
No, I must also point out that I believe that you are a colonel in the Indian Army. And
I'm not a colonel yet.
Sorry.
I'm going to become a major first. So I joined the Army, Territorial Army in 2012. And just a very quick note on this one, because you mentioned it. My grandfather was in the Army, but he was not very educated, so he was a non-commissioned officer. He retired as Havaldar. And my father, late father, was determined to go beyond what my grandfather was, so he became a fighter pilot in the Air Force and resigned to join public life. And I was thinking to myself some years ago that my grandfather was in the armed forces, my father was in the armed forces, and I went to an Air Force school. So I had that whole armed forces defense background, and I wanted to also become a part of that. So I joined the TA, but not as a ceremonial sort of, they give these posts out to a lot of celebrities, etc. I went the whole 9 yards. I did the exam. I went to the SSB. I got my full commission in 2012, and I was in the government of India at that time. So it became a bit of a problem because as a minister in the government of India, your protocol is higher than those in the army. And I was not getting a commission by the defense minister, Mr. Antony, who was defense minister. And but I finally got my commission, and I'm serving now in the 124 Sikh unit of the TA, which is housed near India Gate. But I'm very happy that I was able to don the olive uniform as a third generation. So I'm quite happy and proud about that, and hopefully I'll become colonel soon.
Many congratulations on that, and thank you for everyone here, and thank you for your service. Sachin, but you bring up a nice segue to move from geopolitics and the interests of nations in terms of determining foreign policy to interests in what I would say is your profession, politics. We're sitting in the All India Management Association, which is the apex body for management, but it is also the spokesman for the Indian manager and leader. And here we delve upon subjects through the lens of management principles, and you yourself have studied at the finest of institutions. What is the view of politicians themselves, and what is the view of political parties with theories of management? Do they ascribe to them? Do we look at organizational structures in any manner? What is the evolution of this? And what is your personal view on this subject? I'd like to then move on from that subject, so that my chain of thought would be to move into some more pointed questions on problems that face Indian corporates and how those may be akin in political parties, such as family succession or the motivation over multiple generations to be aligned towards management principles. And then lastly, I'd like to then come to your views on the aspirations of the Indian youth.
So you're right. I think it's a tough one. How do you align principles of management, good governance, etc., on political parties? A good manager doesn't have to belong to a corporate entity. A good manager could work for an NGO, could work for the government, could work for any agency in the world. It's the traits of the individual that matter, and the surroundings that you recognize and can deftly adapt to. In politics, it's the reaction time is 1 millisecond. In the boardroom, you have multiple views. You can solicit ideas. You can act upon it, and your efforts and your ROE, the return on effort, is what it is. But in politics, sometimes it's things and circumstances beyond your control. You do your best, but your talent, your hard work, your motivation, your results sometimes may not align with the rewards that you get. So when you come into public life, you have to be very mindful that it's not quid pro quo. You will not get rewarded for exactly what you've done because there are other forces at play. You talked about generational shifts in families, in the corporate sector and in public life, in politics. There I have to say it's a lot more tougher than transferring shares or appointing somebody on the board. You may have some pushback, but ultimately, the shareholding will prevail. In public life is different because it's not the board members or the shareholders, it's the actual constituents and citizens which decide whether you're capable to run for office or not, whether you will get voted in or not. And if you get voted in once, there is no guarantee that if you don't perform, you'll get voted back in again. In the corporate sector, as long as you have good managers, and I see now a lot of families have just become owners and they're given the management of it to CEOs and MDs, etc., and they hire professionally, which is another way of doing it. But in politics, it can't be done. You can't outsource. You have to go to the people. You have to, every 5 years, fold your hand and ask for another 5 years. So it's much more testing in that sense. I won't say it's more satisfying, but yes, certainly you feel a sense of achievement if you are able to deliver on certain things. Small things, Nikhil. It's not really about changing India, but in your own constituency, in people that you have influence over, if you can negotiate and you can implement even a small change of just drinking water facility or a roadway connectivity or a school or infrastructure project, it gives you that satisfaction. It's difficult to compare, and I think one should not compare. Everybody works hard, but one thing stands true. If you have integrity, if you're honest, if you're hardworking, no matter what profession you follow, whether it's being a politician or being a good manager, people will see it. And no good work or hard work ever goes to waste. So ultimately, if you're diligent and you're working hard, वो हिंदी में कहावत है कि जब दूध को उबालते हैं तो मलाई जमती है, जब दूध ठंडा होता है तो मलाई हमेशा ऊपर ही आती है. So ultimately, you will prevail and you'll come out on top if you keep persistently working hard.
No, I've seen that with you. You are a tremendously hard worker, and very frankly, Sachin returned from Armenia this morning on a 12-hour flight with a 6-hour layover. So thank you very much for being here and keeping to your commitment. But Sachin, in this day and age of very vast and very quick technology changes, businesses are adopting that change very quickly. How do you see politics changing both with technology as well as with thought? The principles of leadership and accountability are very clear, and you've alluded to them very well. But how do you see that changing with the nature of technology? Do you see citizens demanding more from a sense of accountability from the politicians, given the changes that are happening in society with these technologies?
So I think one must understand, Nikhil, and I think all of you also, I'll just take 1 minute. When we think of politicians, and all of you do, I'm sure, somehow we tend to think that politicians have either come out from outer space or from underground. Politicians actually come from the same schools and colleges and gullies and mohallas and towns and villages that we all live in. So it's not that politicians are different species. We're all the same human beings with the same, fears and insecurities and likes and dislikes that all of us have. So sometimes you always tend to think, wo neta log hai, they're just a different commodity or a different set of individuals. That's not true. we're all basically from, cut from the same cloth. And to answer your question, times have really changed. I've seen in my own 20, 25 years of public life, the expectations, the citizens, the voters, like you said, much more demanding and very short-tempered. So the anti-incumbency kicks in much quickly now because people are aspirational. Everybody's on the go. Everybody wants fast delivery, quick reactions, quick fixes. And that's demanding on the system because there are only limited resources to deliver everyone's expectations. Technology has changed the entire ecosystem of how politicians operate, how we campaign, how we communicate. 15, 20 years ago, it was newspapers and televisions. Then became cable television, then satellite television, mobile phones, internet, now YouTube, Instagram, social media. So when society changes, politicians have to adapt accordingly. And if you don't, then you pretty much get voted out. If you're not able to align with the changed mindset and with the younger people, how this country has progressed. And ultimately, when you have to make policies, Nikhil, you have to understand, you have to connect with the wavelength of the people you're making policies for. It just can't be the same bureaucratic functioning of churning old policies with new names. You have to understand the reality of today's India. How do you do that? By meeting, interacting, connecting, understanding and supporting what people want. So expectations from politicians have increased dramatically. It's good that people are being made to account and are held answerable for what they say. And I think all political parties and all politicians, when we say something, it must be held to account. And I think even the courts have said about this, that manifestos can't just be an announcement and then you forget about it. This is serious business. And our words must mean something. Political parties' commitments must resonate in the hearts and minds of people. So people have to have faith in what politicians say. If you don't have faith in what netas are saying, then really it's not doing justice to our democracy. And how do you do that? By being credible. The single currency that works at all times, in all corporate sectors, in all politics, is credibility. If you don't have credibility, then you can say what you want, you can do what you want, it counts for nothing.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to open the floor up for questions. So if you could start gathering your questions, and we'll have someone take some mics around. But before that, I'll ask Sachin a question, and maybe after that, if Sanjay, you have a question, you could also ask Sachin. So Sachin, last thing I wanted to end with is what you were alluding to right now, which is the aspirations of the youth and aspirations of the voters. What is your personal view on the jobs is essential, that is an essential need for our young demographic. There seems to be a slow growth in the formal sector jobs. There are many more jobs which are happening in the informal sector and in areas such as construction. What is your view on the individual aspiration of the new voter or of the existing voter? And how do you think that that could be bridged by you personally? And I don't mean by your party.
It's a very obvious thing that what's really hurting the most today are two things, in my view. Is the income disparities in this country, the K-shaped growth, the Gini coefficient, whatever you want to call it, but the disparity between villages and cities, rich and poor, has increased tremendously. It's a cause of great worry. There are still hundreds of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people who are not making enough to make two ends meet. And we're adding billionaires every week almost. That's a big concern, I think, for the country. Second, of course, is employment. Now it's unemployment, and what is worse is underemployment. You have a qualified young man or woman who's gainfully employed, but very underemployed according to his or her skill sets or qualifications. Now that's very, very demotivating for a young person when you've done a good degree or 2 degrees or a master's degree, and then you have to work in a place because you're forced to take up that job. So that's very underwhelming for a family and for young people especially. So jobs certainly remain one of the biggest concerns. And I'm not saying it because it's a political issue, it's a reality today. That are our young people getting enough avenues, enough platforms to at least live up to their potential? Sadly, we are not. What do we have to do? We have to go back to manufacturing. I see no other space because you can't have people from the farmlands move straight to AI and engineering and service sector. They have to go through this cycle of shop floor, manufacturing, and then move up the cycle. So we have to really focus on manufacturing as a country and industry that can be transitional. So from agriculture to agro-based, small scale, the powerhouse of European countries, for example, in Germany, most jobs are given not by large corporations or blue chip companies. It's a small and medium enterprises that actually employ 70, 50, 100 people. And they're really the engines for growth in that country. So in India, we have to start looking at micro and small industries, manufacturing entities so that young people can get absorbed into that sector.
Okay. Sanjay, do you...
Thanks, Nikhil, and Sachin, thanks so much for addressing us and sharing your views and very candid views and for making it after a long flight. So I'm going to go back to geopolitics for a minute, because from a business perspective, 3 or 4 years ago, if you asked me, what do you do about geopolitics, I'd say nothing, because I never thought about it. It never occurred to us. We never understood it, and we didn't address the issue. Today, it's becoming more and more apparent with all the conflict in the world and all the choices and positions countries are taking. And my question really goes back to China. And you talked about China +1. You talked about us leveraging the opportunity. I come from the automotive industry, and unless you invest heavily in tech, you're not going to leverage the opportunity of China +1. It'll go away. It'll go to Indonesia and the Far East, etc. However, at the same time, I don't think we can ignore China. And that's something that, continuously is discussed in terms of let's leverage what's happening outside of China. But if I go back again to the automotive industry, there's a 20 million vehicle population that I cannot ignore. And what do we do as a country, and as businesses in the country, to make sure we don't ignore that opportunity of playing in China, as opposed to just being the +1?
But the obvious answer, Sanjay, is that India is not a small marketplace. So I think we have to leverage that also with China. A lot of Chinese goods come to India and we have our policies, etc. But you're right in 2 accounts. One is that if we don't invest enough in tech and give the kind of opportunities that manufacturing requires, the jobs and the companies will go to Vietnam or Indonesia or Thailand, which they have post-COVID. A lot of money was pulled out of China, but we were hoping to get a large chunk of that investment. It didn't happen. It went to other South Asian countries, the ASEAN countries. You're right, and I said in the beginning, it's not about countering China or opposing it. It's about managing and containing it, containing the negative fallouts of the geopolitical attempts to encircle India. They're buying up assets in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, Pakistan, and creating all sorts of issues for the future, sea lanes and shipping and trade routes, etc. That's the policy and geopolitics. But the economics of it is that we have to engage. It's one of our largest trading partners. We have a huge deficit in terms of trade deficit. But we have to also use India as a large market, and we can counter that. Money will come from private sector, investments for tech, and I think the government of India should really open itself up to the challenge of adopting new age technologies, because unless we do that, redundancy will set in. We already have huge issues in manufacturing. If we don't have proper technology and long-term sustainable sort of policy framework for manufacturing, we can't compete. It's very competitive. It's not easy. And I take your point that even in your own sector, you have a very large market, but we're way behind some of the larger countries in Asia in terms of manufacturing, especially for auto sector. So I completely agree with you. We have to invest in tech and technology and look ahead. But times are changing. We can't wait for the government and every government bureaucrat and policymaker to help you sort your issues out. You have to take the initiative and push and prod, and we can do the best we can from being in the opposition. We can knock on them and make sure that we have the best policies that they can make.
Thank you.
So, Sachin, I've got a bunch of questions here, and they range everywhere from geopolitics, and I've got some more right now, which I'm going to read through as well. One of the questions was also on China and the medical device sector in India, which depends 80% on its components and supplies from China. And the question was, what happens if a conflict erupts? Those supply chains will get stopped. Do you have an opinion on how robust and resilient our internal systems should be for certain critical goods, and how we should build a manufacturing base? I think you answered it partly with...
It's the first rule in the book. Supply chains, we have to now realize we have to de-risk our supply chains. You cannot be dependent on crucial commodities and something that is so integral for our country and society, especially in some crucial sectors. You cannot allow monopolistic supply chains to function anymore. We've seen what happened. Ukraine-Russia war has taught Europeans so much. We must, smart people learn from other people's mistakes. So we really have to think about plan B, almost for all such crucial sectors. There's no doubt in our mind.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think the perspective that we have to take is a slightly longer term perspective, because developing certain industries require time. And there's a need for policymakers to view it with that time frame. There's another question here about what is your take on agricultural produce tariffs and agri-exports and the WTO? But let's look at that in a broader perspective. Agriculture is the base of and livelihood for a majority of Indians. It's also something where we have to protect livelihoods from unfair competition globally. Agriculture globally has a certain degree of protection, and I think that it is deserved in India as well. But unless you allow markets to operate, how can productivity go up? How can you ensure that a farmer is not able to realize the maximum income from his piece of land if he's not able to utilize modern methods and tools?
So I know Nikhil's view on this, so I won't disclose them to you, but as a policymaker, I can tell you, look around us. Some people have objections to how much protection Indians give to our farmers, subsidies, no income tax on agricultural produce, etc. It's a fine argument, but look at the global reality. I'll give you one data point from almost 10 years ago. European Union gives as much subsidy to its farmers that every cow in Europe can fly around the world twice in first class. That's the amount of money they give to the farmers. It's just a data point from 10 years ago. So we don't have the kind of resources to give money to our farmers, but must understand our land holdings, our agricultural practices, the sheer number of people dependent on agrarian sector is much more than the population of US and Europe combined. We have to look out for the interest. If you let market forces decide the price points and the productivity issues of our farmers, they just can't survive. While I agree you have to handhold, make them stronger, make them more productive, make them more economically viable. But as landholdings get smaller with each generation, it becomes even more difficult to do economies of scale, to mass production. But technology, better productivity, better implements and more importantly, Nikhil, it's the remuneration. And I think my party was the only party in last election where we committed ourselves to having a minimum support price as a legal guarantee. It's a demand of the farmers. We have MRP for everything we buy, most goods, right? So we have to have something for the farming community. I agree with you that there has to be transformation, but it has to be gradual. It has to be societal. It can't be one policy initiative by any government. And I fully stand by the interests of the farming community because they are so large that if we don't look after them, where we were 50 years ago, 40 years ago, importing everything, including wheat. So after the Green Revolution, we now enough food grains to sustain ourselves, but give them credit, give them time, give them enough space and leverage and economic bandwidth to grow and sustain themselves. They're all as aspirational as your kids and my kids are. They also deserve a little bit of hand-holding, and let's not feel terrible about giving subsidies and loan waivers to farmers all that much.
Well, that's the next question actually, Sachin, is what is your view on freebies? Now, of course, the fact is that you did point out that one of the biggest issues is a disparity of income and not enough opportunities with a large percentage of our population. A lot of people who feel that they're being left behind. But what is your view specifically on freebies? And
I think most people here will agree with one thing. Any of our fellow citizens who's been left out of the economic growth cycle are on the fringes of our society, both economically, socially, geographically. Those families, those individuals need the support of the government. And that's true. But it should be transparent and targeted. It should not be done to catch votes or just an election cycle. It should be done with empathy. It should be done with honesty, transparency, and specifically targeted to those groups and those individuals who need the support. Now, you can't have a government of the day taking pride in giving 80 crore people free meal and then say कि रेवड़ी बांटना बड़ा गलत होता है. You have to also live up to what you say, right? And I'm proud to say that my party and I stand for what I think is important, that farmers, downtrodden, underprivileged people need subsidies, support, loan waivers, food subsidies, even free electricity at some point. But it can't be done merely to garner votes and to grab headlines. Because I think that is also now having little effect. And I know many parties who have announced the world and more and didn't get voted back. So when political parties make announcements just to get votes, that I think is not good for the economy or for the country. But you cannot take away from the fact that there are tens of millions of people who will be left behind, impoverished totally, if you don't reach out and support to them. You know, a midday meal program, a farm subsidy agenda, economically really poor people need certain educational and constitutional support. I'm all for that. But your question was freebies. Now, how do you define freebies? What is a freebie? When I say something, it's a freebie. When you do something, it's your constitutional moral authority and your right to do it. That can't be done. Like I said earlier, just to quote one more time so that you don't forget this, 80 crore people getting free food is not a freebie. But if I say some poor farmer needs to have some subsidy on their electricity bill, that's a freebie. This Reddy culture that people talk about, they should hold themselves accountable first and then talk about it.
You know, that's a great answer. Thank you. And I think that it's important for us to view it as citizens of the country, that our citizens are not left behind. We don't want to live in a place where risks increase when you have such levels of disparity. And it's been proven in many economies around the world where you have increasing disparities, it leads to much more crime and other factors of risk. There's some questions here about functioning of Parliament and how it could be more productive. Individual politicians are held to account every 5 years by the populace. But the acts within Parliament themselves in terms of debate and the conduct by which politicians hold themselves to, do you think there is some accountability as a collective? And do you think that there should be some form of accountability as a collective of all politicians within Parliament? Or within whichever legislature they're part of?
Absolutely. And that's not just true for Parliament, also state assemblies. In my own 20 years, Nikhil, I've seen the quality, the level of discourse and debate really coming down. And I'm very sad to say this. When I first entered Parliament in 2004, there were Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji, ex-Prime Minister, Mr. Deve Gowda, ex-Prime Minister, Chandrasekhar ji, ex-Prime Minister, and Manmohan Singh ji, current Prime Minister. So you had 3 ex-Prime Ministers and 1 sitting Prime Minister in the same house. And you could see the regard and respect across the aisle. I mean, if any of those 3 individuals ever got up to say anything, the entire house would be pin-drop silence to listen to what they had to say. A small intervention or a question or just a suggestion would be really heard and implemented and taken into account. That sort of dignity and respect for the opposition or for people with a different ideological background, I think is now decreasing. And the politics of acrimony and revenge and vendetta and the use of brute force, suspending 140, 50 MPs in one day, never happened before. So I take your point that you have to lead by example. And I speak for all of us, including myself, that if you are having a debate, make it reasonable. And in my own politics, Nikhil, I have criticized my opponents vehemently. When I was in opposition in Rajasthan for 5-6 years, not a single day went by when I didn't scrutinize, criticize the government of the day, when I thought policies were wrongly implemented, issues of corruption, administration, governance, all the time, 24/7, every day. But I never crossed the line of making personal allegations, of using language that is unbecoming of a public person. Those are the things that you hold yourself accountable for. And if all of us do that, I think we'll present to the next generation a much better quality of politicians. We'll tell the whole world, how much of faith we have in ourselves. I know one thing I like about, there are many things I don't like about the American system in their politics, but something I like about the US system is when the candidate loses, the concession speeches they make, if you ever listen to the winning person will make a good speech, but the person who loses really makes a very resounding concession speech. That really, I think, enforces the concept of democratic values and norms and etiquette and politeness in public life. The shouting, slinging matches, name calling, all of this, I think some of it is fueled by the media and all this 9 o'clock news and WhatsApp memes and so on and so forth. But really, we must take a step back. You can oppose with decency, you can criticize with vigor without being abusive, you can make your point without shouting, and ultimately all of us as Indians, we have a 5,000-year history of culture, heritage, of respecting each other, of living with people who have opposing ideas. That's one thing that's special to us. And we mustn't lose that at a 9 o'clock debate or an election cycle.
Thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, we're running short of time. I'm going to give all the questions that you've given me to Sachin, so he'll have an idea of what you've asked. Some of them are somewhat personal in nature, so you can read them at your leisure. People's names are written down there, so with mobile numbers in case you want to if you want to get in touch with them.
That's dangerous.
But I'd like to now invite Mr. Sanjay Kapur to give the vote of thanks and concluding remarks.
So thank you so much, Sachin. I mean, I think this was a very candid discussion and great sort of learning experience, for all of us in terms of how politics is run and what the thinking is and what the thought process is in terms of, when we look at India's role in a multipolar world. I think, with all that's going on in terms of growth, etc., we're sitting in a great place. It's for us to leverage that opportunity. And I won't summarize all your talking points, but I will touch upon a few things that you spoke about. And one is really manufacturing and the demographic dividend having jobs. And I think manufacturing and building manufacturing businesses or manufacturing from 17% of GDP going to 25% is really key. I think, something we need to all consider. And you talked about foreign policy defines us, and I agree with you. I think, again, geopolitics has become so apparent and so important to address in all our businesses. And therefore, I think if the right foreign policy, measures and the right policies in place will help us. And finally, you talked about politicians not being aliens. And, it's encouraging to speak to a politician like you. It gives us so much hope. I just hope that you're doing more to recruit people like yourselves, like we do in business.
Are you offering yourself?
It's a good question. We can take that off.
No, stick to what you do, seriously. It's not that much fun.
So thank you for your time and for everything.
Thank you, sirs, for that discussion. May I request Mr. Nikhil Sahni, President AIMA, to present a memento to our esteemed guests. We thank Mr. Sachin Pilot. Our thanks to Mr. Sanjay Kapur. Thank you, and that concludes this discussion. We are moving on to the next panel discussion, which is marshalling the markets, driving growth, democratizing wealth. Please remain seated. We're moving on to a very interesting discussion. And meanwhile, you can see the poll question on screens. The Viksit Bharat dream depends on the growth of the financial economy even more than the growth of the physical economy. Please do share whether you agree, disagree, or you can't say. Please remain seated. We promise you a very enthralling discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming on stage Mr. Vishal Kampani, Non-Executive Vice Chairman, JM Financial Limited, Mr. Ashish Dhawan, Founder and CEO, The Convergence Foundation and Chairperson, Ashoka University, Mr. A. Balasubramaniam, Managing Director and CEO, Aditya Birla Sun Life AMC Limited, Mr. Vetri Subramaniam, Chief Investment Officer, UTI Asset Management Company Limited, and Mr. Sanjay Narayan, Chief General Manager, Zonal Office, Delhi Union Bank of India. A warm welcome to you all. May I request Mr. Kampani to conduct the session.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having all of us here. Ashish is the founder and CEO of the Convergence Foundation and the founding chairperson of Ashoka University. We have Vetri, CIO of UTI Asset Management Company, Sanjay, CGM of Union Bank of India. We have Bala, who is the CEO of Aditya Birla Asset Management Company, is unfortunately stuck in lovely Delhi traffic, but will be joining us very shortly in the next 5 minutes. Gents, pleasure for having you guys here with us and look forward to a very exciting and educative session on the markets. I want to just make a few points before we start. We've seen this amazing trend of financialization in the Indian markets. Incrementally, more and more savings are going into equities. We've seen a scenario where returns on equities have outperformed almost every single asset class in the last 5 years, and that is driving more money to the markets. India's market cap to GDP is almost at 1.5 times. India's rise in demat account holders has gone from 4 crore demat holders on March 2020, pre-COVID, to almost 17 crore demat holders today. As of August 31st, there are 2 lakh crores worth of filings in SEBI for companies to raise equity capital. Bajaj Housing, which went public and closed their IPO yesterday, saw 3.3 lakh crores of demand for a 4,600 crore issue. And the very interesting trend has been the rise of the domestic investor. And in my 27-year career, being a capital markets professional, never seen this tide. I mean, there is huge amount of flows coming from domestic money, and an interesting chat today will be with the panel on how can this capital be used to create long-term value in the country and not be really speculative capital. And the concerns are really around depth of the markets. What happens if the markets are overheated and you see a correction, and also how do we absorb all of this capital for capital formation. So with that, I will invite our panelists to make a few comments, and then we get into Q&A. Ashish, it's a pleasure to have you. Congratulations on receiving your AIMA award for corporate citizenship. You really inspire all of us, with your skills and the wealth, that you've put to use for greater good. And you've had a long-standing career in private equity and really founded one of India's finest, homegrown private equity funds, Chris Capital. So I'll start with you, your comments on how do you feel about India right now?
Maybe I'll start with the macro and global India and then come to financial markets. So I'm extremely bearish on global macro. Let me start with that. I think the Western world in particular, thanks to very high debt levels. I mean, if you look at debt to GDP, it's gone up dramatically in the last 20 years. And demographics has worsened. You've seen how even in China, demographics has worsened dramatically in the last 10 years. And in the Western world, they're below replacement rate pretty much everywhere. So for those reasons and the whole geopolitics as well, the world's a pretty risky place. Growth is going to be low in the developed world, much lower than it's been in the recent past. I think coming to India, we're extremely well positioned from a macro standpoint, in that even during COVID, we were very responsible in not busting the fisc, not taking our debt to GDP too high. So India, I think, is a safe zone in terms of macro. But when you come to financial markets, I think we're in the midst of an everything bubble. There's a bubble everywhere. I mean, whether you look at the US, where you have this magnificent seven, which just keep going up and up and up. Corporate profits are at an all-time high. I mean, my own prediction is if you look at markets like the US, which is a bellwether market globally, it now represents more than half of global market cap. And my own feeling is that in the next 10 years, it will deliver close to a 0% IRR in real terms, 0% IRR in real terms. India will do well long term just because of I mentioned, the growth, the macro stability, all of those reasons. But I think we always forget that financial markets move in cycles. Whether it's bank lending, there's always a cycle. Same thing with markets, there's a cycle as well. And I think this cycle will end in tears. It'll end very badly because there's rampant speculation right now. I mean, the F&M volumes are a signal of rampant speculation. The whole SME IPOs is an example of rampant speculation. The fact that when you go to any ordinary place, all people talk about is the returns that they have made and the participation in equities. That's a sign of rampant speculation. So whenever this happens, I mean, my sense is it never ends well. And, people will argue that, look, there's a lot of domestic savings and it's coming into the markets, 1 lakh crore of domestic savings coming in every year, or every month, sorry. But, these things can turn. I think the thing is that all the retail investors, Vishal talked about
while India has done a great job with a great regulator, I think SEBI has been a great regulator, and we widened the base. But this widened base of people who have experienced equities have not seen a down cycle. I mean, even COVID was a blip. It wasn't a real down cycle. And so my worry is that the small investor will lose their shirt once again. Even high net worth people who are speculating will really get crushed. And it's not going to be a pretty picture as we go forward. So Vishal, on the one hand, I think we've done a good job in broadening our markets. On the other hand, I think we have to really be worried about the rampant financialization, speculation, and those things like what happened with the bank lending cycle. You know, everything went well, and then you had this downturn, NPAs, it slowed things down. On the equity side also, you know, if you have a down cycle, it will mean companies not being able to raise capital. It'll mean that, you know, people go into their shell for a period of time. So I would rather see a more steady increase in markets versus this rampant bull market where there's a lot of speculative behavior, which is likely to end very badly.
Well, those are great views, but you know, on the contrary side, we always hear that corporate balance sheets are in the pink of health. India is delevered massively. Every meeting we have in Ministry of Finance pushes us to make more investments. And people feel that the downside to valuations are low, just as a counter. While I agree with your views, but there are counter arguments. So, you know, Vetri, thank you for joining us at this panel. You're a veteran in investing. You know, you lead a formidable group of analysts and fund managers at UTI, and you've been with some fantastic institutions prior to UTI, and you know, set up many asset management firms. Do you share the same views as Ashish, and how are you thinking about investors who are investing in your funds and accessing the markets?
Sure. I won't go too much into the macro. I think, you know, Ashish has made some very relevant points about the state of global macro. You know, having worked in the asset management industry for over 2 decades, I can't but say that I'm delighted to see the kind of growth that we've had. I can't but say that I'm, you know, very happy when I see the kind of reach that we've managed to have in terms of getting through to investors. Mutual funds, when I started, you know, 24 years ago, were a push product. You really had to push it because people were saying, you know, why should I look at a mutual fund? Why not just stick with my, you know, fixed deposit? And today we actually see commentary about banks suffering because people are preferring mutual funds over, you know, putting their deposits in the bank. So, you know, I look at that and smile and say mission accomplished. So, you know, we've certainly done some good. But you have to worry about the fact that the market might be getting slightly ahead of itself. In an Indian context, I would say it's the valuations and the investor expectations which give me the greatest cause for concern. You know, in an economy which is capable of growing 6 to 7% in real terms, 10 to 11% in nominal terms, if you've got an equity market which is priced at pretty much the priciest that we've seen in a very long time, and where the investor expectation is north of 15 to 20% returns per annum, these two things don't match. And when investor expectations receive a setback, it takes a very long time for, you know, people to, you know, you actually start to see outflows from markets, and it takes a very long time before you can get back to them. The one good thing that we've seen in the last decade has been the rise of systematic investment plans. I'm sure all of you track those numbers. Maybe many of you are invested through systematic investment plans. I think what's that done is it's allowed people to think longer term rather than just looking at it as a short-term investment avenue. But having said that, when we look through the data, without doubt, even those who are doing SIPs and investing in other schemes, there is momentum-seeking behavior. I mean, the SEBI data shows this. Hardly anybody stays invested for more than 2 years. And, you know, we saw another extreme version of this when SEBI released some data on IPOs. People are flipping out and getting out within 30 days and 90 days. So, if I were to look at what are the positives, what are the negatives, I would just sum it up this way to say, I think the democratization of access to capital has been something which will continue to benefit this country for many years to come. 10 years ago, the research team at my current firm or any other firm I worked at typically had a universe of 150 to 200 companies where they carried out research. So they didn't invest beyond 200 companies. Today, most firms like ours have universes which have reached 500 companies. That's a function of the kind of assets that we manage, but also a function of the fact that there's such a wide range of companies we can invest in. So I think this is the wonderful thing that is happening in terms of creating a domestically driven capital formation cycle. But as Ashish wisely pointed out, equity markets are inherently cyclical. And therefore, I think it is wise for investors to sort of be prudent. And the message that actually we try to keep reiterating to investors is that eventually investing is about reaching your financial goals. Reaching your financial goals requires you to be disciplined in terms of asset allocation. Stick to that. The worst thing you can do in investing is choose to take on more risk because your neighbor is making more money than you. And unfortunately, that's a much stronger driver of behavior than doing what is right for them, which is asset allocation and thinking long term. So there's both good and bad in what is happening, but I think, it's just part of the journey of democratizing the markets and making sure more Indians are able to participate and more Indian entrepreneurs can raise capital in the local markets.
Thank you, Vetri. It's a very interesting point you make on that in your data you're seeing momentum in SIP investing. I mean, that's very interesting. Bala, thank you for joining us today. You're a stalwart of the mutual fund industry. You lead one of the largest asset management companies managing almost 4 lakh crores. And I know you are very involved with SEBI in a lot of changes coming for the mutual fund business. And as well as going to be credited very soon with the 250 rupee SIP, which is a game changer. And you've also led AMFI. Would love to get your remarks on this topic.
Yeah. So I think I was just looking at the number, how it evolved. Sometimes we ourselves don't believe what we have achieved in the mutual fund industry. The reason I'm saying is, I just looked at the last 10-year number. Whichever number I look at it, everything has gone up by 2.5 times, 3 times. Now, I'm not talking about the market. I'm talking only the assets under management. In the year 2016, 2014, it was roughly about 10 lakh crore, 14 lakh crore size. Today is about 58 lakh crore size. That's maybe even the number even keeps rising actually. It's become now 60 lakh crore size. And if you look at the number of folios, we used to have about 4 lakh folios that we used to have. The unique investor, we used to have roughly about 1.7 or 1.8 crores. And today we have folios of close to about 20 lakh folios. Again, that's gone up. And then we used to have worry about why all the money is coming only from Mumbai and Delhi. And why industry is not penetrating, going deeper parts of the country. So that time SEBI introduced B30. Because first time ever, we all of us together coined a word called B30. Which is nothing but top 30 cities, and the next 30, the rest of the cities used to be called as B30 cities. Very simple. Nowhere in the marketing textbook also you will find these kind of words. But the moment it was done, there was a lot of seriousness that went behind in expanding the reach of the mutual funds, and now we are seeing the benefit of that. The B30 AUM, T30, it used to be somewhere around 85% of the mutual fund assets and management. It used to come from only Mumbai, Delhi, and so on and so forth. And today, the B30 AUM in the equity is now close to about 27 or 28%. So that's something, a big change that has happened. The last, which of course I would like to highlight is, in general, the investors in general are fixed income oriented in India. I think most of us are very conservative, believe in 7-8%, I'm happy, and so on and so forth. I think since the time the demon happened, I think since the time interest rates were brought to more stable kind of regime where borrowers were getting money at a reasonably affordable rates. I'm talking about high interest rate regime, low interest rate regime. You go to bank deposits, you get about 6-7%. The moment that happened, we saw the fixed income dominance of the mutual fund industry start reducing, equity dominance have improved. I think that's why today, while we are sitting on out of 60 lakh crore, almost about 30 lakh, 35 lakh crores as the equity assets and management, rest is coming from fixed income. There is again a big shift that happened. So this is something in my own belief is have done good for the country. It's a good problem to have. I think we may have argument on valuations and where the market will head, whether 80,000 is right. And I always believe that even at 60,000, we never felt that 60,000 right. At 70 also, we never felt 70,000 is right. Therefore, 80, whether we can say whether it's right or wrong, it's something that always be a debatable point. The fact of the matter is, money which otherwise not coming to the capital market for so many number of years, and as Vetri mentioned, from a push it became a pull, because the experience has been good. People are seeking for investment which can give better return than a traditional investment, I call it. I'm not saying fixed deposit or gold. Traditional investment that all of them used to do. So that's something that has happened. Second, my own belief is, I think Vishal mentioned about a bigger shift has happened in the capital market. Most of the companies were heavily dependent on rising resources through the debt capital market and build their business. I think that's the way most of the Indian corporates are used to borrowing from banks and less on equity capital infusion and more of borrowed capital through which everyone used to build business. I think most of the Indian corporates are used to build business like that. And after the IBC got introduced and banks' NPAs were rising, then after IBC, people start realizing, I'm building the business, but tomorrow I will not know whether my business actually will stay with me or will go to somebody else. The moment the IBC came and NPA resolution became very, very sharper, most of the companies have started building the business not through the debt capital rising, through the equity infusions. As a result of that, most of the Nifty 50 companies, the borrowing leverage in which I think we are generally known for, that became lower, and today the leverage levels are less, and most of the companies are able to tap the equity capital market, and basis which they are able to build the business. This has now made it more stronger from the capital market point of view. Whether it can be captured in the valuations is something which John doesn't know, but improvement in the balance sheet, efficiency improvement, also the reflection of confidence, efficiency reflects in the valuation and so on and so forth. The other just wanted to, before I hand over to Vishal, I just want to highlight another number. Till about 2007 and 2008, the Nifty 50 companies used to be used to represent 80%, 85% of the overall market cap. 85% of the overall market cap used to be represented by only Nifty 50, handful of 50 companies. Today, the same number is about 50% only is coming from 50 or 55% is come from Nifty 50 companies, overall market cap, and rest of them is come from the other companies, which essentially means other than Nifty 50 companies today are in a position to contribute to the larger market cap, which is also a reflection of the widening of base in the industry and widening of more and more corporates tapping the capital market, getting in the listed, and also increase in wealth effect is also now being reflected. That is something now being recognized in the Indian financial market. That is where the mutual funds have played a bigger role. And in fact, mutual funds are now become an accepted way of investing in the capital market. There is a complete behavioral change. I used to see the behavioral used to be, whenever I used to market, used to be volatile. The one common question used to be there, should I redeem? And today the question completely got reversed. Now the question comes is, should I invest? So that is the way it has happened. I think that's something, there is a significant progress that we have made as a country, as a mutual fund players, as a financial market player, in deepening the financial instruments of mutual funds across various parts of the country, which in my view will go a long way. And last but not the least, the banking industry deposit size, or the mutual fund industry size, used to be only about 13% of the banking industry size used to be the mutual fund industry size. Today, gradually is now has gone to about 23%, whereas worldwide, in US, it's almost about 100% deposit size, more than 100% of the deposit size is represented as mutual fund industry size and globally, whereas India, we still have a long way to go. So this is something, is a fact, money will come, market go up and go down, and all depends upon how the economy continues to drive, earnings continues to come. And of course, so far the markets have been going up, because most of the analysts have been predicting the expectation company's performance lower than what they have been actually delivering. So they have been outperforming. Maybe the time will come where the company will start underperforming the analyst expectations, and that is when we'll probably see some kind of consolidation happening in the market. But the fact of the matter is, optimism is also one of the driving factor for both capital market buoyancy as well as for the mutual fund flows.
Thank you for those comments. Very interesting. I think, Ashish, coming to you, big driver of investment in India has been private equity, global private equity. And, today you talk to any of the global private equity bosses, I mean, India is clearly one of the most important markets, where they want to commit capital. And even when we see the primary markets, almost 70% of all new issuance activity is happening by private equity-backed companies. From your experience, what more can we do as a country, as an economy, to encourage private equity investing from domestic capital? It's more, long-term in nature, more geared towards capital formation. And how do we, as a country, over the next 10 years, make that structural shift where, more of our capital goes into private equity asset classes?
Yeah, I think beyond private equity also, maybe looking at other instruments that are longer dated. Firstly, I think the retirement savings pool has increased. If you look at it as a percent of household savings, I think it was something like 11-12% of household financial savings. And it's gone up to almost 18% of household financial savings. So I think retirement is very important. The pensions, etc. The insurance portion has stayed stable. I think at around 18-20% of household financial savings. So these are two pools of capital which can invest in long-dated instruments. I mean, if you look at where does US private equity get its money from, it really gets its money from endowments, from pensions, from insurance, etc. And pensions being a big contributor. I mean, the reason the Aussies also got so much money is because of the superannuation funds. So I think if we can grow the pension market further, and there I think in terms of what the Aussies did in terms of mandatory retirement savings, contributed by both the employer and employee and sort of raising that a little bit, but offering choice is one way to grow the retirement pool. And already we've gone from 11-12% to 18%, so hopefully that will go up further. So in my mind, that would be the way. And then of course, as private equity or these other instruments start to generate reasonable returns and actually show that they can create alpha long term, then they can grow as a percent of the retirement assets or insurance assets, etc. So, and there I think that many of the players are responsible players. So hopefully it will happen as we go forward. Disclosure needs to improve further in that asset class. Unlike public equities, which is very, disclosure is very high, mark-to-market is immediate. I think we know there's some global issues around asset classes like private equity, where you don't mark-to-market. My own belief is that private equity globally maybe has grown to become too large. And many folks who are over-invested will actually be trapped, going forward. So I think in India we should do it prudently and not overdo it also.
Thank you. I think, Vetri, just taking on from a comment which, Bala made about the banking sector and the lending that happened in the last decade, which, resulted into a large NPA. But if you see the return on capital today from broad-based Indian companies is pretty high. And one aspect of that is that almost 10 lakh crores worth of bad assets changed hands through the IBC process, the SARFAESI processes in the last 10 years. And they changed hands to good companies who were able to buy these assets at significantly lower sort of value to asset prices, and they were able to generate significant returns out of them. And therefore, when you see return on capital compared to, say, a Chinese business in India, the returns on capital are a lot higher. And how do you think about that aspect when you're looking at long-term valuations in India? I often hear from investors that, if a company is generating 25 to 30% return, right? I mean, and growing at 10 to 15%, I'm fine paying a 35 or 40 times earnings on it. So specific question on valuations. How are you seeing it from a longer term perspective? Yes, there seems to be a bubble now, but what is your medium to longer term view?
Sure. So multiple ways to cut and slice this. One is, I would say, when you've got the economy growing in real terms at 10 to 11%, because that's the architecture that we have of growth and inflation. For the aggregate corporate sector to churn out ROEs in excess of 25%, I would say is actually just not possible, never happened. Today, if you look at numbers like the Nifty 50, the ROE is sort of at decadal highs at about, in fact, more than decade highs at closer to 15%. But I think this is also perhaps a cyclical peak, because as you see capital formation accelerate, you will actually see companies putting that capital to work, which will actually start to depress return on capital in the short term. So I would actually say, the equation at a stock level, you will always find some exceptional businesses with 25, 30% ROC and, fabulous growth metrics. They can have different outcomes. But the market aggregate as a whole, this is a very, very difficult equation to expect as an outcome. So I would actually submit that current valuations where they are, if you look at the Nifty 50, 21.5 times forward earnings, you look at its history, you look at the ROE, you look at the kind of growth, these are expensive valuations and prudence is called for. Further, Vishal, if you actually, as much as I like the fact that the markets have democratized, we are going all the way down the capital chain, investing even in, company number 500 or 600, the strange thing is that the valuations of this set of companies has actually exceeded what used to be for the top tier companies. And I find that rather unusual, because we know all the challenges that smaller companies have, whether it is depth and breadth of management, ability to deal with changes in regulations, economic cycles, access to capital. And when you see them collectively being valued at a premium to the large caps, it seems to me somebody's risk perception is not quite right. And that does give me, cause for concern when I look at it from a valuation perspective. So I think there are certainly some things to worry about when you look at this market from a valuation perspective. And, we've got to keep this sort of schism in our head. What is good for the economy, what could create incomes, is not necessarily immediately good for you in terms of being an investor in the stock market. Why? Because the stock market goes through cycles of greed and fear. You can't outlaw this. And because you can't outlaw this, you've got to think about what I believe are the three most important words in investing, which is margin of safety, right? And that is now vastly eroded. So I do think from a valuation point of view, there are issues to worry about. One final point, Vishal, and we see this in a lot of the data. You go back and look at the kind of valuations we had 2007, 2010, where we were in the late 1999, early 2000, the Harshad Mehta era, 91, 92. You will find that when those starting valuations were high, they were a permanent drag on forward returns, even going forward 10 years and 20 years, right? So I do think, therefore, you need to be careful. That amber light is on, you could argue is the red light soon to come on. But as equity investors, this is a time to be cautious, not to be ebullient. So that would be my sort of simple message.
Thank you, Vetri. Bala, coming to you on a different question. We have a very broad-based audience here representing Bharat. People have come from, all sorts of towns all over the country. And, taking one question from here, 3% of India's population is investing in equities. We are seeing a big rise, as you said, in terms of folios in the mutual funds. What innovations do you see coming from mutual funds in terms of new product introductions in the next, say, medium term to long term, 3 to 5 years? And what all steps are you taking? I mean, you've been a very active member of AMFI and on SEBI committees to spread more investor awareness.
Yeah. Of course, in terms of awareness, a lot of work has gone behind making financial literacy becoming one of the responsibility of mutual fund industry players. Since the time the mutual fund Sahi Hai, that time I was the chairman of AMFI in 2016, and then we rolled out mutual fund Sahi as a brand. In fact, at that point of time, we never imagined this will have such a huge impact in creating comfort for the mutual fund industry to gain the confidence of every investor and say mutual funds say here before investing. That has now become a brand itself. And this has been, of course, helping entire industry players. Any new players coming in is definitely helping them. And now it's well understood in every language, every city of the country. And SIP is something everybody has understood that the best way to participate in the Indian mutual fund industry is through the SIPs. That now, in my view, will remain. In terms of financial literacy, definitely, of course, I think more work to be done in terms of creating awareness about solution. I think generally people think the mutual fund means is a product. I think mutual fund is a solution provider for every needs of the customers in the country. As Ashish mentioned about retirement plan and so on and so forth globally, but in India still nobody talks about savings for retirement. Of course, everybody thinks about it, but not do it structurally using mutual fund as a vehicle. So there's a long way to go and making mutual fund as a solution provider and taking away from a product and moving to the as a solution provider. Then this, in my view, the way US has done 401k has now become the way of investing for every citizen of the US, every employee of the US. I think a similar model can get set as far as Indian mutual fund is concerned. There we have to do a lot of work we have to do. At the same time, in terms of product innovations, I think often we take pride also, and sometimes people even do criticize. Both of them are there, especially money managers criticize this, whereas public at large appreciate it. Even I was also part of the committee at once in categorizing mutual fund industries. This is the only industry ever in the world. We know large cap means what? What does it mean by large cap? There's a large cap scheme, there's a multi cap scheme, there is a flexi cap schemes. Now there's been categorized. Nowhere in the world it exists, and India is the only country it exists. And now this has done actually wonders in people understand the product uniformly across the country. It doesn't differentiate. Everyone knows if large cap mean in Delhi is the same as actually the same definitions exist in Chennai as well. So that is the way I think is now been done. Therefore, incremental there is nothing to be done as far as the product innovation concerns. Where some of the product innovations could come, one, given the wealth effect is rising. See, whatever said and done, the wealth effect in India is rising now, spread across the country. Number of millionaires have been rising, number of family offices that are now growing because of most of the companies who are in the private space are now selling it out, they're encashing it, now they become family offices. This is not a phenomenon which exists only in the top cities. Actually, phenomena exists different parts of the country for a variety of reasons. Thanks to the government of India spending in road constructions, spiritual tourism has been actually increasing the land prices and so on and so forth. Therefore, the more money is coming in the hands of people, therefore, the demand for product which are alternate to mutual fund product also is emerging. Therefore, I see the alternate investment product is similar to a mutual fund, but literally higher risk kind of things that could potentially come. But within the mutual fund space, REIT and InvIT, maybe the time will come where the REIT and InvIT as an instrument which has got a combination of all the three, dividend, capital gain, as well as interest income, all the three gets captured in that. And these kind of instruments could come as part of the mutual fund space as we move forward, because most investors would look for not just only chasing the return, you also need to have protecting your return that you have gained in the market. Therefore, you move to the hybrid kind of asset class. That could one would come. Third, which could come, of course, is the fund of fund, where you take away the pain of identifying various schemes in which you have to make investment. The same investment can be identified by the money managers themselves. Therefore, the fund of fund could be one model which could also evolve as we move forward. And last but not the least, I think there will be a lot of evolutions will come in the passive product. I think passive is something not many talk about it, because the mutual fund product are generally relatively expenses ranges from 1% to 2%. I think globally the ETF product, the passive product, I generally don't call it as a cheap product, but the product which replicates index. But you will probably find many products offerings coming in the ETF and the passive space, which takes away the pressure of the expectation of beating the benchmark and so on and so forth. Therefore, the passive as a product could also come as part of the overall solution. This is why I see the overall product evolution happening in the overall scheme of thinking. As the industry become bigger and bigger, these innovations I think would come. In fact, even SEBI has actually floated a paper recently asking mutual funds whether they can run long-short kind of fund using the F&O market. But these are the innovation could come, but My own belief is whatever innovation one does in the mutual fund industry, ultimately it comes back to the same basket of securities. We can't go beyond that. Therefore, in the mutual fund industries, innovations will give a limited success. I think what will give a greater success, greater satisfaction investors is the traditionally tested funds, which are, I call it as conventional funds, I think will give a better outcome over a period of time rather than innovative funds which can give you a short-term gain but not necessarily give you a surety for the long-term gain.
Thank you. We have lots of questions. I'm sorry, I won't be able to take all of them, but Ashish, just one question on growth. I think we've heard in the last 2 days on various sessions, we've had a lot of bureaucrats, a lot of ministers and senior people from the government and CEOs talk about how India's growth needs to be higher from an employment generation perspective and also an export perspective. What policy and sort of initiatives you feel the government needs to push on for a much higher growth rate?
Thanks. I think it's a very important question because India is on a path to grow at 6-7%, but we really need to grow at 8 to 10%, right? So firstly, for me, I think when we talk about becoming a manufacturing powerhouse, it really has to get manifested through exports because it makes you much more competitive. And I think the government has announced big plans, $1 trillion of goods exports going forward. I see that the policies around electronics, for instance, are very good. But we need I think where we need to move towards is realize that in every sector, you need to do 4 or 5 policy things at the same time to make us viable and competitive in the sector. So PLI is a good start. India is doing PLI. I think we are announcing better infrastructure, better industrial parks and connectivity, lower logistics, etc. We do need to rationalize in many sectors our duties. Because if you move from Atmanirbhar, protecting the industry, to now exporting, if we want to be competitive in electronics and someday export 300 billion of electronics, component duties need to be rationalized. We need reform in labor code at state level. And we need some of the enabling conditions, like you need dormitories in certain sectors like garments, electronics, or policy. So I think we've had a piecemeal approach to policy. We do one thing at a time. Whereas I think if you want to make an industry competitive, like electronics, China exports 950 billion of electronics. India has every right to export 300, 400, 500 billion of electronics in the next decade. But we'll have to really support the industry and do 5, 6 things at the same time. Same is true with garments. Actually, if you look at textiles and garments and only look at ready-made garments, India's export is only 16, 17 billion. Even Bangladesh and Vietnam beat us. China is still at 150 billion. This is the most labor-intensive sector on the planet. For every $1 billion of export, you create 100 to 120,000 jobs. No other sector will give you that. We should prioritize this because China will lose share. It can't all go to Bangladesh and Vietnam. It must come to India. So I think one is manufacturing exports. We need this holistic approach. PLI is a very good start, some of the infrastructure things. So I think government is doing a great job. But for each sector, creating these 5, 6, and being consistent with it, for the next 5, 10 years. A second, I would say, apart from the export and manufacturing part, is that we really need to look at areas where there's high growth potential, like, for instance, overseas employment. India's inflow from remittances is 125 billion. My own belief is it can go to 300 billion in the next decade. Because the OECD countries have terrible demographics. They will not want permanent immigrants. They will want to follow the West Asia model eventually, where they get people for 3 to 5 years. Japan is offering that. Korea is now offering that. And India can be the supplier of talent to the world, right, going forward. That will require the requisite skilling, the right accreditation, harmonization of the degrees or credentials. So I think this is another big opportunity that we could leverage. So I think there are probably 3, 4 things we need to do to make ourselves more competitive and also focus on more labor-intensive growth. So it's not a question of even whether we grow at 6 or 8%. I think the challenge has been India has grown well actually over the last 30 years. Obviously, it can grow 2 percentage points higher. but we've really not created enough jobs in the last 30 years. And the reason is we have not prioritized labor-intensive sectors. We have not thought about what is the right policy. China did that, by the way. Every labor-intensive sector, garments, footwear, toys, electronics, every single category, they have 30 to 90% global market share, right? We need to, and China will lose that market share now. When you go to Vietnam, they're the first recipients of that. So how can India really prioritize labor-intensive growth is the big question, not just growth. And I think that now the government has realized is also extremely, it's not just a question of skilling. I think many of these actually skills are very simple. You get trained in 3 months. It's more how you stimulate demand, how you create the right policies, how do you get more FDI in, how do you stimulate more domestic manufacturing, how do you make India competitive? I think that's what we need to work on.
Thank you. Bala, a specific question for you from the audience. How will the liquidity issue in banks be addressed with the amount of flows going into mutual funds? And I think the intent of the question is, will that impact credit growth? Will that have an impact on other sectors because of the lack of deposits in banks? Yeah. Growth in deposit in banks.
Yeah. So I think credit growth, what we see is slowdown in credit growth is also a function of how RBI has been coming after banks and NBFCs, where they have been expanding their credit growth by increasing the personal loan and other consumer-related loan. That's where the rate of growth has been very high, and because they also offer higher rate of interest. And given the fact that the last few years we have seen one of the highest credit growth with relatively lower deposit growth, the Reserve Bank of India has been coming very heavily on banks and tightening the norms. One of the areas where RBI has tightened the norms is the liquidity coverage ratio. We normally, what we get to hear is SLR and CRR. And over a period of time, post IL&FS crisis, the Reserve Bank of India has tightened the kind of liquidity that banks have to maintain by way of investing in government securities. For they will come in handy during the time of stress. In fact, as I speak today, most of the banks are sitting anywhere between 28 to 32% in the SLR securities, as against only the defined SLR are only about 20 or 21%, and CRR is about 6.5%. And this is something Reserve Bank of India can always release it as and when they need it. It's not something which is difficult. But mutual fund coming in, we always believe it is within the systems. It's moving from one hand to the other hand, but it doesn't actually take away the money from the banking system. Somewhere it's in rotations. Therefore, one can't make an assumption that money is moving from banks to the mutual fund, therefore banks at risk. Definitely, the banks, if they don't offer a commensurate, this definitely puts the pressure on banks to increase the deposit rates if there is a flight of money. Because ultimately, what investors does, as the awareness increases, they'll always look for asset class which can give a better return than deposits. We are seeing some change actually in that, where money is also looking at other options that are available, including gold and so on and so forth. But from an RBI point of view, they have enough tool, and I think today the FIs outflows have been there, and not much of inflows have been coming. Even FDI investment, while there has been inflow, but it's been lower than the previous years. Whenever we see forex flows improves, definitely the Reserve Bank of India in a better position actually to buy dollars and provide more liquidity. Therefore, these are the tools in which I think they will be able to definitely do it. I think today is not about credit growth is not growing. I think they are now being suppressed or maybe being now guided by Reserve Bank of India. We should not continue to grow at a very high rate of growth and credit concerns. It can actually create a bubble, which in my view, proactive measure which the RBI is taking is a temporary cooling off that is happening. Despite all those things, we are still not seeing a desperate switch coming from banks for rising deposit rates to rise liquidity for the banks. I think they are in a very comfortable position as I speak.
Thank you. Last question before I hand over to Sanjay for closing remarks. Vetri, a question for you. How can equity mutual funds and the money flows in equity mutual funds actually help improve the manufacturing and infrastructure sector? And, when you're investing, how do you think about allocating more money, which is actually going towards capital formation?
Sure. Good question, but I just want to make the point that the master we serve is the investor who's given us money with certain expectations of the returns that they would like to generate from that asset. So We are not in the business of sort of trying to match it with some other priority to say we would like to promote manufacturing, because our investor has not given us a mandate saying I am willing to compromise my financial return because this helps the nation in some other way. So, that's my limited point in the sense that we would not engage in that. Having said that, the industry has in the past launched what we call sectoral schemes, which could have a very specific mandate to only invest in a sector. That's a conscious choice made by the investor. So, I'm fine with that. But otherwise, we don't let that influence our thought process. We are eventually guided by only one thing. What is the potential returns that the investment can generate for our investor? And what that is driven by is the fundamentals of the business we invest in, which is, put it very mildly, does it generate cash? Is it able to reinvest cash in its business? What's the kind of return on capital that it can generate? When these three things happen simultaneously, that's where the magic of compounding kicks in. And that's where, I'm of the opinion that in investing, the beauty of compounding as we talk about it is the number of years rather than the rate of return that you earn in any single year. So really it's more about thinking long term over there, but we're not in the business of making choices, be it for manufacturing or for that matter ESG. ESG is a very controversial thing. Should we factor it into our investment strategy? Of course we do at some level, but unless the investor gives us a mandate saying, I am willing to sacrifice some level of economic return if you can meet certain other metrics on ESG, it's not a choice that we can make. We can only exercise the choice as given to us by the investor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sanjay, can I request you for closing remarks?
Thank you. Vishal ji, Ashish, Balasubramaniam, Vetri, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to conclude this fascinating session on market. The session has been an education. The distinguished panelists have helped us appreciate the market trends and emerging investment dynamics. They have highlighted the role of market in India's ongoing economic revolution and raised important issues that affect investment and regulation. The discussion generated useful ideas for making India's market deeper, wider, and safer. Traditionally, the financial market have been the dominance of elite, which has affected both its capacity and stability. The market must be attractive for India's masses so that India's savings are readily converted into investment and Indian companies have a larger pool of capital to fund their growth and efficiency. Indian capitalism needs to be inclusive, and it is only when the masses can generate income from surpluses, however small, and the divide between Dalal Street and Main Street gets bridged. Mr. Kampani, thank you for moderating the session and raising several important issues and concern the market and economy. You extracted most out of short discussions and brought out the multiple perspective of market economy nexus. It was a pleasure being with you. Mr. Dhawan also touched on macro global scenarios, bubble in financials, rampant growth in market should be an area of caution. That was his advices. Mr. Vetri, he touched upon mutual funds were a push product initially. Bank deposits, he touched on bank deposits degrowths also, and the rise in SIP. Democratization of assets were also touched by Mr. Vetri. Mr. Balasubramaniam, he touched the post-demonetization ROI decrease and stabilization and shift towards the equity that happened. We learned a lot listening to you. Your wisdom about the market clarifies many issues for the audience, and foresight helped everyone to get sense of what the future holds. You were fantastic, and many thanks for sharing your insight and ideas with us. Ladies and gentlemen, your interest and excitement during the discussion was quite obvious. Clearly, money gets people to concentrate. Many thanks for joining us in the session. As a banker, it seems that after this session, it seems that the job of a banker is going to get tough going forward. And that is going to help India in getting more innovative banking liability products in the market. Thank you. Thank you so much for the session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
May I invite Mr. Nikhil Sahni, President AIMA, to kindly present the mementos for this session, token of our appreciation and thanks. We thank Mr. Vishal Kampani, our thanks to Mr. Ashish Dhawan, thanks to Mr. A. Balasubramaniam, we thank Mr. Vetri Subramaniam, our thanks to Mr. Sanjay Narayan, thank you, Mr. Sachin, for joining us on stage to present the mementos. So, ladies and gentlemen, with this, we come to the end of AIMA's 51st National Management Convention. Thank you for joining us here today and for making it a great success. We look forward to seeing you at the next set of AIMA's programs soon. Before we close, we would like to thank once again all our sponsors who have supported us at this convention and made it possible for us to organize it at this larger scale. A big thank you to all our sponsors. Our sponsors for this program are Platinum sponsors, Tata Steel Limited and Triveni Turbines Limited. Diamond sponsors, Apollo Hospitals Group, Jindal Steel and Power Limited and Kirloskar Brothers Limited. Gold sponsors, Air India Limited, Transport Corporation of India Limited and Union Bank of India. Knowledge partner, KPMG in India. Silver sponsors, Ambuja Neotia Group, Apollo Tyres Limited, Kevin Care Private Limited, GAIL India Limited, Hindustan University, Loyola Institute of Business Administration, Chennai, Neo Foods Private Limited, Sona Comstar and TVS Motor Company Limited. Bronze sponsors, Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited, Delhi School of Business, Dempo Group, Godrej Industries Limited, GL Bajaj Institute of Management and Research, PGDM Institute, IMS Ghaziabad, JK Paper Limited, Mahanagar Gas Limited, Management Development Institute Gurgaon, Medicaps University, NBCC India Limited, NHPC India, NTPC Limited, Oil India Limited, Power Grid Corporation of India Limited, Punjab National Bank and Tata Chemicals Limited. Corporate sponsors, Bamal Lorry Company Limited, ASAF Small Bank, Engineers India Limited, Hindustan Petroleum Corporation Limited, Management and Entrepreneurship and Professional Skills Council, and Nabha Power Limited. Thank you once again. Enjoy the lunch and have a great day.